I'm Kelsey Moser, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel, where no sandbagging goes unscrutinized.
This is episode 39 of Narrative Wake. Me, usual host, Thorin, Kelsey Moser, usual co-host, provider of jokes, human being with a body, face, I don't know. Why people always go mad, right, Kelsey? Because they always think I'm the one referencing your looks. But they don't realise I do it to cut people off at the pass so that they stop being assholes. I draw them away. I make them think through the pantomime of, you know, sort of banter, a little bit of rapport here, that we've covered all that. And then we can move into the show and start getting incredibly in-depth on League of Legends and stuff that, as I've already referenced this in the past, everyone on Reddit pretends they want in content, but none of them actually want. So we know that. I'm fully aware of that. I mean, you know this. Whenever the most in-depth article that you write is the one that people are going to read the least. True?
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. I agree with that assessment. Especially if it's long, because of course if it's short you can't get really in depth on anything unless it's like insanely basic, like one word placement in one game or something. But otherwise, yeah, it's pretty difficult. People don't really like long things. They don't really like. But it's not just Reddit, right? It's everywhere. It's pretty ubiquitous, yes. Like in the entire community, because I always see people like I Will Dominate doing posts like, what kind of content do you guys want? And the analytical game stuff is always, but that will get always the highest voted thing on his polls. But nothing gets more views than him like shit talking other people or those cut the Western shit videos that he was doing for a while. So yeah, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like, actually, that's why I actually think that blame game concept is actually genius, because what's good about it is it doesn't go super in depth. What he does is he just takes like the surface level thing of like, do you think this person's wrong? Here's a reason maybe he isn't. By the way, if you notice, spoiler for anyone who hasn't seen that show, 99% of the people aren't to blame, because he just stretches the concept of blame to, well, I guess technically this isn't guy who should only be blamed. Therefore, again, my friend, who's also a pro player, again, isn't to blame. What do you know, guys? And the next segment. But anyway, no, I love that show. I love Mark. Love you, mate. And keep doing the show. It's successful. All I'm going to say is, though, in the end, the reason why that content didn't come out so in depth is because you are to blame. It's you alone. Irony. What do you know? So anyway, let's start the episode, Vedius. Listen, you know, I'm letting you know how it is to start out with the show, you know, mate?
Yep.
It can go dark real fast. But to be fair, usually not when you're on the show. Like, those days are behind me, you know. The episodes where we actually berate the guests while they're on the show, that's more of a summon and insight thing. I wasn't really on board with that, you know. Well, I was. Sometimes I hated some of the guests.
I mean, but it gets clicks, man. It gets those clicks. We were just talking about this, right?
It does. But no, my usual MO at this point in time is I usually shit talk the guests like on the next episode.
Right.
Or, I mean, everyone knows this one as well. Or I shit talk the co-host, but on the other show to the other co-host. And then, you know, and just hope they don't watch the other one. Well, I say hope. Doesn't really matter if they do. Anyway, moving on. Start the episode. Here's where I want to start, Vedius.
Mm-hmm.
You haven't been around that long.
No.
You're still fresh in the game.
Right.
What is your theory as to why even EU fans seem to... It's like they're interested in the EU LCS. Obviously, they follow it. But why do you think even EU fans act as if it's not as compelling a region? Like, I know obviously NA fans have their own reasons to be biased, or, you know, maybe they're just not up early enough to watch the games. Why do EU fans have sort of like self-deprecating appreciation for the league, do you think?
I mean, I think for a while it was due to our take on Europe as a region. So we were very fortunate that we had Grepo and Officio as very talented analysts for a long time on the EU LCS, but they've always been very hypercritical. And so because they are very good analysts, often their idea of what good League of Legends is a very high standard. So I feel that for a very long time, they did a very good job of identifying like what was wrong. And not necessarily what the teams are doing right. And so because of that, like over time, people would obviously listen very intently to what they were saying. And I think a perception kind of formed where Europe as a region was considered just relatively weak. But also, I think that it didn't help. Like, we've had 2 exoduses so far where a lot of our talented and like fan favorite players kind of left. and we're kind of in the rebuilding stage as well of building new talent that people get attached to. But even now, Reckless isn't even playing LCS, and you can ask any player or any fan rather, and their most favorite player to watch is Reckless. Whenever you talk to fans in the studio, like, "Oh, hey, show was great today. Do you know if Reckless is in?" And he's not. So I think that those two kind of things kind of combined. Recently, we've kind of changed our approach, and we kind of focus on more of the hero building and storytelling to try and make it a little bit more enticing, give people more reasons to watch. And I think it helps a lot. But also, it's just, we've got a lot of new young players that are kind of still building their brand. And Misfits, G2, and Fnatic, I still think are pretty popular. Vitality is kind of getting there, but aside from that, the popularity of the teams, I just think, isn't there yet. And you compare that to NA, you've got kind of like well-known players across the board. So even old timers, I've been watching LCS since the beginning, and even I still like to watch a lot of the teams in the NALCS just because the names that are like, if High was still playing in the NALCS, I'd probably still watch him just because I've watched him for so long. So I think it's those kind of combination of things where that perception comes from. But good news is EU LCS doesn't suck. We have some pretty good teams this year.
Yes. That is unfortunately also just like here's the thing, I don't think that's actually a flaw of analysts, because actually the most knowledgeable analysts probably should view things through that lens, because that's just the way they're calculating the game, you know, and what the ideal move would be. The big problem, maybe what you're alluding to here is that you got to have balance when you do that. You know, you've got to kind of like, one person can do that a bit, or two people, but you've got to have someone who kind of, as you say, bigs up the storyline or who the hero was, you know. We actually have the same problem in CSGO. There's a couple of analysts, it's not like they're going to watch this show, but they know who they are, where all they ever do is whenever someone like wins an amazing 1v4, they're explaining like, this guy made a misplay here. It's like, well, obviously they're not robots, you know, like that's going to happen. Believe it or not, they're not all playing the game perfectly either. Well, we once had an episode about junglers that was somewhat similar to that. But anyway, do you have any theory, Kelsey, as somewhat of an outsider to the EU LCS in some sense? What do you think is the reason why? Aside from, like I mentioned, the obvious like NA bias where they just want to hit on the region. Because EU fans themselves, it's not like they go as wild as you'd expect, you know.
Yeah, so I actually did a bunch of stuff on this last year when this was like a big thing and everyone was super low on the region, including interviews and stuff like this. I think a lot of it was just the questions that were being asked in some of the interviews, and people covering the region were just not even aware of a lot of the storylines that could be tapped into, and the players themselves were a bit reluctant to come forward initially because, I don't know, when one of them tried to show some personality, he immediately and did poorly. He, like Perks, for example, couldn't really accept the backlash and immediately retreated into a shell. And a lot of them, I think, had this kind of perception, and it was just like they didn't, since people weren't specifically asking questions. Like for ages, Odoamna and Cabochard had like this internal rivalry, and no one ever talked about it, right? Like no one really ever asked them about it until like last year, for example. And I just think a lot of it was people just like didn't do as much research or didn't work with the players as much on personal storylines on the broadcast or in journalism. Like I always, like, you probably read my fucking articles, they were just super, oh, he plays this and he likes to play bad matchups, and when he goes for this trade he does this, and I would talk to them about that shit, and it was just always much more game focused, which I thought was important. And I think that it is important, Kelsey. Don't let anyone tell you. And I've also, like, I've criticized both ways. I've criticized the EU broadcast for not caring about some of these personal storylines that players will talk about if you ask them about. But I've also criticized the NA broadcast for being like way too rah-rah in that sense, and not necessarily having as much playing details, or not necessarily criticizing their players enough when they do play poorly. And I think that both broadcasts have actually done better of having balance this year than last year. So
absolutely right, because here's the thing, Vedius, if we're going to get excited, isn't Misfits a pretty good storyline to get excited around?
100%.
They had that sort of like, it was like an all right last split, you know, but the team looked actually like they were behind the rest, you know. They didn't look like they were going to win LCS. They're undefeated now. They're rolling completely. Why is this the best team in the EU LCS?
So, yeah, it's actually a super cool story for Misfits, because when they first joined, they had a bunch of rookies on the team, and they they brought in Power of Evil in place of Selfie. And a lot of people are like, whoa, I don't know if that's a good idea. Do you remember Power of Evil on Origin? And like, I don't know if this guy's actually a good mid laner. And then they came to the LCS and they were really good. And in their first split, I think they finished 4th. And then the split after, they finished 2nd. So then they went to Worlds. They had the whole SKT fiasco where they went to 5 games, and everyone thought they should have actually won that. Maybe they could have gone to finals, you know. So there was a lot of hype around this team. And then last split, they just kind of they sucked because they had this really big issue where they were really good in the early game, but they always drafted themselves into a situation where if they made a single mistake, then they would fall behind and they wouldn't be able to do anything. And that single mistake happened way too often. So they kept losing to teams that they shouldn't have lost to, but they could always like beat the top teams. Like they're undefeated against Fnatic this year for some weird reason. But this split, because the meta has shifted so much and it's way more early game focused, and they've shifted their draft a little bit, now they can afford to take advantage of the strong early game that they already have, and they can actually close out the game because the game is easier to close now. Like Baron is much easier. It feels like there's more goal in the game. Snowballing just feels much stronger. So all the elements are together to allow Misfits to succeed. And the fact that we didn't get to see them at Rift Rivals was kind of sad because I really want to see what the gap was between them and some of the top NA teams. But based on how they're performing now, if the meta doesn't shift completely, I think Misfits will be a very scary team internationally. I hope anyway. I've said that about G2 before, and look how that went. So
it's okay. You can just trust again. Open your heart. It's like there's a great quote by the Indian mystic Rumi that says, like, your heart has to be broken enough until it can open. That's the EU mentality.
That's very true.
So that is it, right? Come on, Kelsey. Why is Misfits doing so well?
I do think that last split there were a lot of issues with mid to late game setups in Europe among the top teams. And that was something that certain teams, I'm not going to name any obvious names, took advantage of in the
Round out a few cheap wins towards the end. Yeah, we know.
I mean, these were legitimate problems with gameplay, and I think a lot of it had to do with contesting vision, but you can get to a point where it's super easy to contest vision because you've snowballed so far ahead of the other team by the time Baron spawns. And I think that has helped a lot of the top teams a lot. So in this meta, yeah, they're really good.
And also, to reference a past episode, see, this is where I do it, Vedius. I talk shit on them when they're already gone from the show. So Loco was bemoaning the death of the AD carry, you know, the roles being changed, you can't play AD carries anymore. Obviously, that's because he watches the NA LCS, so to some degree, I know what he means. Problem is, though, as I tried to tell him on that episode, if you watch the LCK, a bunch of teams still play the standard comps. Misfits is a team just playing traditional comps, right, Kelsey?
Yeah, and if he watches NA LCS, he might actually think AD carry is good, but I'm assuming he only watched Rift Rivals if he thinks that they're completely gone, because NA teams playing AD carries got destroyed by Heimerdinger, which I think was just more of them not necessarily being prepared for the pick than AD carries
funny,
being
though.
bad.
It's very funny.
But I do believe that they, like I said, I think there are certain teams that got major advantages by deciding how they want to play in this meta before other teams did. Like, I feel like G2 and Misfits right away latched onto something in the meta that they really wanted to do well. G2, it was like the funneling thing. Misfits, it was the just play standard, whatever, you know, like we'll just play the game we've always played and we'll do that. And I think the fact that they didn't kind of like get a crisis of conscience or experiment too much, and they just were able to work more on the fundamentals and stuff within the style that they decided to play, allowed them to continue to grow and get better at these types of areas, while other people were saying, oh, we should practice other picks. Like, how do we set up lane assignments with these types of picks later on in the game, right? How do we do this type of gameplay with these new picks? Whereas Misfits are like, okay, we're going to refine something we're already good at. So
I also think that they had they have a really consistent play pattern, which is they often play through bot, they get early advantages bot, they then look to take an early Drake, and then they swap. And they always do this around 7 or 8 minutes so that they can early contest a Rift Herald. And then with Rift Herald, they automatically gain mid priority, and then with mid tower down, they then just gain full control of the map. And it's something that they do so consistently because of how well their bot lane plays, but also just the fact that they invest huge amounts of vision towards the bot side of the map. And they just basically say, okay, if we're going to play this AD carry style, we're going to take advantage of the fact that they can trade pretty well. We're going to ban out things that are annoying like Vladimir and Swain because they're really obnoxious to deal with. And if we get rid of those, then we can almost guarantee a winning bot lane all the time, except for the exception when you have Heimerdinger involved. So they have a style that they're very good at. They have players that are very good at enabling it, and then they have a strategy that they can consistently execute upon, and they for the most part have really good drafts most of the time. So I think that you need to find a way to stop their bot lane winning if you want to have a real chance, because so far the most success they've had is just constantly playing through their bot lane.
I would say that they've relied more on good support matchups than AD carry trading, because I would say that in a lot of situations AD carries are losing out on the trades early more because of health regen and stuff like this.
True.
So I would say that that's probably more of a big factor. Also the fact that they're able to use like that lane priority very well and transition it. And I just think that because of all dragons are good now, as the EU LCS broadcast likes to remind us, Cloud Drake is good, and that's just like a very good way to play in general if you can pull it off. So to play through bot lane and then swap early for Herald.
So because when Vedius told the story of Misfits then, a lot of people who were only watching the big games of the top teams only basically got on board in the summer of last year. They didn't watch the spring split, and then they saw the end of the summer, maybe the playoff run and Worlds. So as a result, I think purely because if that's your window of watching Misfits, yes, that is exactly when Maxlaw played all the team jungle champions. But we have seen now, especially in this current meta, there's a lot of carry jungling play from Maxlaw now. So what's different in that sense, Kelsey? Come on, as the resident jungle aficionado.
So one thing that was noticeable, and I think we talked about this when Hussein was on, was that Maxlaw's engage sense is kind of off sometimes, where he'll like engage far ahead of his team, and they kind of compensated for that in spring a bit with certain picks like Shen that can just kind of buffer that engage, and we did talk about this in spring. I think now this element is still kind of there, but the team is just like more cohesive, and also they always have mid prior, so much more consistently. And that's something we haven't really talked about, is that Sencux is actually playing so much better. Like, you can kind of revisionist history and say, no, he was just underrated, and he was like, no. He was losing. He was losing matchups he should win. So, and now he's performing really, really well, actually. So I think that that's something that we haven't brought up at all. That is quite possibly like the biggest factor in Misfits' turnaround, is that they are able to, like, if Maxlaw wants to do something, Sencux can be there very easily because he's able to maintain mid priority like this.
Okay. How do you contrast them, Vedius, from Power of Evil era Misfits to Sencux now? Because obviously when people first heard that move, when they heard Power of Evil's moving, but getting Sencux, a lot of people thought, that's fine, that sounds, that's not that terrible a move. But as you're saying, obviously it didn't work out very well in the spring. So what's different about the two mid laners, do you think?
So I think the biggest difference is the willingness to adapt the champion pool. Power of Evil still plays Orianna. He played it with Smite and NALCS, I think, last week.
What I like is I feel like Power of Evil doesn't actually believe in the concept of global meta. He just believes in changing the build. He's just like, which item makes it viable? Like,
I can get behind that, yeah. He was just someone that, to me, always came across as quite unwilling to change. I think Ignar was someone that was very similar. He had a lot of good performances at Worlds, but one of the big issues for him during the regular season was that the ardent support meta was something that he wasn't really on board with, and something that he didn't want to get involved with. So I think it was something that both of them struggled with, and I think it made the team dynamic hard. And something that both Sencux and Mickey brought was that they had massive champion pools and they were very versatile. But something that's always been an issue for Sencux is that I don't think that he's ever really had distinct champions that he's really excelled on, aside from things where he roamed. So Aurelion Sol, Galio were two champions that I thought were really good for him last split, and stuff that he could have an impact on, because I always felt like he was a smart player and he was always a team player, but he was never one that kind of found his own lane advantages. So then coming into this split, when he started the split playing Lulu, and then I think his second game, I can't actually remember what he played in the second game, but they were both super supportive champions, and I thought, this is nice.
Probably Galio, I assume.
Something like that. But it was very much around, okay, this is like, they're enabling Sencux. This is a meta where he can just be put on utility. He can enable the carries that are Maxthor and Hansama, and this is good. This feels like a perfect meta. And then he starts bringing out Aurelia and Yasuo, and he's actually doing really well on them. And I don't know what suddenly made this shift in his playstyle. Maybe it was their bootcamp in Korea. Maybe it's the fact that he's just built a lot of trust with his jungler and he's working really well with Maxthor. But regardless, the fact is that not only does he have a versatile champ pool, but he's also playing what his team needs and he's actually doing it well. So I think that's the biggest difference between him and Power of Evil. And in the end, it was an investment that Misfits believed in and is now paying off. So credit to the organization for making that work.
Just averaging like a cheeky 13 KDA. Not bad.
It's not bad.
It's not bad if you can afford it, as we say. Like Kelsey, when you say he's improved, he's doing better, where does he actually stack up in that sense? Like, we'll put it in context for us.
Ranking? Oh, gosh, it's actually super hard. I haven't thought about this yet, so I can't give you a definitive answer right now. But I think he's...
Like, could he be the best mid laner?
I wouldn't say he's the best. I think he's still like he's still distinct on a distinct tier from like Perks or Caps, for example. Mm-hmm. But his relationship with his jungler is good. And I've noticed this about Maxthor, it always takes him a while to kind of gel with his teammates or to get the communication patterns that he needs down. But once they are, like, he always elevates his lanes really well. There's always good communication on these teams when he finds like the sort of starts to understand what his lanes need. So I think that is something that is really, really strong about them, is just their duo as a mid jungle. So.
How much do you think it is the team just coming together? I mean, obviously it's just the second split with the new lineup. How much is it them coming together, figuring out some of the issues from spring, and how much is it that like the current metas helped them?
I do like were just really obvious mistakes that Sencux would make in his laning in certain matchups, like Splyce versus Anivia, where he was just really mistiming like when he wanted to use his Q versus the wall and things like this. So he's not making these kinds of glaring mistakes on the champions he's playing now. So there are definitely huge improvements that Sencux himself has made, and I don't think anyone should take that away from him at all. And I do think that part of the game that was always really good for Misfits is still good for Misfits, and this like piece coming together allows all of that to show up. All of that kind of early team play to show up well, and it is for them. So, okay.
What would you say, Vedius?
I also think that I think Sencux improving is the one thing. I think Maxthor has just gotten smarter overall about the game. I think he's invested a lot of time into just understanding the game rather than necessarily improving his mechanics, which I think is really valuable, because when he first joined Misfits, he was kind of a vocal shot caller, but he wasn't really used to it. And now on this team, the impression that I got was last split, he was pretty much the only one talking, and now the communication overall is much better with him being like one of the primary vocal people. So I think that this gelling factor definitely came in, but also that bot lane, Hansama and Mickey have been known to be very quiet on their teams in the past. And I think that was a big issue for them last split, where they just didn't communicate very well. But you can now see a very clear difference. And we've seen it in a couple of interviews from Mickey, where he's even said like Hans Sama just basically tells him everything that he wants to do and how to play the lane. And the communication just across the board seems to have improved. Combine that with the fact that the meta is all about early game and snowballing, and the fact that this team has always had really good ability to play through that. But also, Alfari is like unbelievably consistent. He's someone we never really talk about on the broadcast. I will be talking about him a little bit tomorrow, actually. But what he does really well is, with the very few resources that his team give him, he is able to output the same kind of level that other top laners that get resources put into them, like Wonder, for example. And the fact that he's able to do this so consistently, it means that the rest of Misfits can basically play how they want. Because like, we were looking at some of the stats, and when you get into the mid game and you look at like how the resources get distributed amongst the teams, Alfari relative to other top laners gets like 5% less farm than everyone else. Maxlord takes it all. They give it to the jungler, and they're just like, Alfari, you get what you can. It doesn't matter. Maxwell needs to take more of the goal because he's our other carry. And Alfari's like, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, he's still hugely impactful in team fights. He's only died 4 times throughout the entire split so far. And the fact that he's so consistent, just like, you have all these pieces that just seem to gel very nicely together. And right now, the only weakness I can see with Misfits is that they're a little predictable in that their playstyle is, we play through bot, we kind of abandon our top laner, and we kind of have a distinct strategy where we move around the map a lot and we play through early game. But it feels like the teams have not found a way to stop that or shut that down so far in the draft. And until they do, I think the Misfits will continue to dominate.
Fair enough. What about this then, Kelsey? So as we transition and talk about G2, when we did the episode that was about Rift Rivals, we referenced the fact that it did kind of kill the hype of Misfits versus G2, that like, or was it was like right after one of the teams got back, and so obviously doesn't really feel like we had that marquee matchup. So in a world where just that had happened, I'd say, well, you know, just because of the records 8-0 for Misfits, you can't just say they're the best team, you know, there's not that much difference between them. Does G2 losing to Giants kill the angle that you could be the hipster and say G2 is actually the best team? Where do you come down on it?
That game was so weird. I feel like G2 didn't
so
have
weird.
Their draft priorities straight at all. And I think Wadid even talked about that on the Euphoria broadcast, is that, you know, if like if a bunch of these champions that are usually banned on Rep side are up, like which one do we prioritize? How do we play with the pick that we've chosen of the ones that are prioritized into the other picks that are open or whatever? And I think that they kind of screwed up that element considerably with how the Aatrox was sidelining versus the Nocturne, for example, and things of that nature. So of course there were mistakes that occurred in the game leading up to that, but I do think that they just hadn't thought that part through when that scenario was presented to them. And it's weird because apparently Giants even just said, or was it Splyce, or which team said that they legit forgot that Aatrox was a thing or something, and they just let it through. So
that does sound like something Giants would do.
Whatever. But so I guess that kind of derails it a bit, but I do think that like that kind of shit happens. So it's hard to say. Whereas I do think that the Misfits G2 game was competitive, and there were elements of the matchups that made it really difficult for Misfits to execute their composition against G2's composition, but they still did it really well in certain parts. So I think that that was still a good match. Like that was still an interesting setup, and that's something that you'd want to see again, or you wish that there was a best of series between them already. But I do think that Misfits is probably the better team, and not necessarily because of the Giants game, but because I do feel like they have more options ultimately, even in the context of this meta, but also out of the context of this meta, than G2 do. And if we look at the PBE changes on 8.15, you know, like stuff could be changing very radically back to certain setups. So we'll see.
Right, Vedius, even though, as I said, Misfits is flying the flag for the old comps, just play actual champions that fit the roles, G2 is absolutely a team that's embraced playing like the support jungler and doing the funnel onto felt perks quite often. Understandably so, most people probably pick him as the best EU player. What do you think of their approach? It's obviously been quite contrasted to the Misfits one.
So I think originally they were doing it because they were good at it and it got them wins. And they felt like that it was one of the most efficient strategies at the time. But I'm also pretty confident that they can play standard. I think that they've demonstrated a few times that they, because they had like 2 games of Rift Rivals, which was funnel, and 2 games which was standard. So I'm pretty confident that they can play it normally. The big issue for me that I see with G2 is their bot lane. So last split, they were criticized a lot because it felt like that, considering how good G2 was during the regular season, their bot lane was kind of a point in which they didn't really play around. They were just playing not to die or not to lose. And then in teamfights, they were fine. But even then, sometimes you'd be like, Hyanan, why are you flashing in here? What are you doing? And there were just a lot of moments where there were big question marks. And then coming to this meta, Hyanan is now one of the best bot laners because all the weird and wacky stuff that you can play down bot, he's already been playing in solo queue for God knows how long. And so now it's his element. But people are starting to target ban him and they're trying to limit the bot lane champ pool. And now he's kind of automatically defaulting to Ziggs, which I think is an issue because this is a champion that could be punished in lane. And it's something that many teams are preparing for and looking to exploit. And we saw in the Giants game that in the early game, they just put all of their resources into camping the bot side of the map because G2 has a history of playing through mid and top. And once that bot, Echo Fox did exactly the same thing. They just hard camped the bot lane. They found an advantage there. And then they did a good job of just using the advantage that they found and moving it around the rest of the map. And it's something that I think G2 need to evaluate and figure out how they can mitigate. I think Kiana needs to expand his champion pool a little bit more, and I want to see a little bit more stability down there. How can they mitigate some of the teams that are going to look to hard camp it or try and shut it down? And that for me is kind of like the big differential between G2 and Misfits. But I do think that with the funnel likely changing on 8-14, more pressure is going to be put on G2's bot lane to kind of perform and level up compared to some of the other bot lanes that we have in Europe, like especially when you compare it to people like Bwipo and Hylissang, who've been crazy in the bot lane right now. Attila and Jack Troll have also been playing super well. They need to move away from like this farm safe lane into potentially like Vladimir, Swain, kill lanes if they want to be able to compete with some of the other good bot lanes that we have in Europe.
Yeah, Kelsey, it's one thing, right? If they just wanted to run the funnel through perks, okay, fair enough. We're just setting up the comp that way. But at this point in time, it almost feels the opposite. Like Hyanan's just never going to play an AD carry because he just hasn't done it at all so far. So where do you come down on that? I mean, it's worked sometimes, obviously.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting because obviously it was mentioned before that Misfits always play through their bot lane, right? And they almost never play through their top lane. But the question comes down to is it fundamentally more valuable to be able to play through your bot lane, for example? Mm-hmm. Is it fundamentally more valuable to be able to transition top? If it comes to a point where you have to play through your top lane, do we think that Misfits can handle it? Or, because I remember some spring 2017 Misfits games where trading sides was a major problem for them in general if they had to trade towards top side. And so that's the question. I think really just ultimately it comes down to having a versatile bot lane is more useful than having a more versatile top lane. Unfortunately. And it comes down to, and I don't think G2 have a more versatile bot lane is the problem. So.
Is that actually going to hinder them much though? I mean, obviously some of the other players in the team are fabulous. So is it actually going to be enough of a weakness to prevent them reaching championship aspirations?
I would say so. It's funny because you have the Reckless interview, for example, where he says, you know, I don't think it's that big of an issue if I'm playing in Europe, but if I'm playing against a great team like RNG and the meta stays lit, it's like, by the way, RNG will only play 80 carries with UCI Reckless. It's okay. But I do think it's an issue when you do get to higher levels, when you don't have players who are firing on all cylinders, and there's a really difficult way to get them to a point where they're playing like a bunch of different things and they're really able to compete at this higher level. And I don't see Hjarnan wanted as a bot lane doing that. Obviously, they do very well on certain picks like Heimerdinger and Ziggs. Like, Hjarnan is considered one of the best Heimerdingers in the region for good reason. So,
how do you think, Vedius, that Jankos has adapted to a world without junglers at times?
Very well. I think his Braum A tier cannot compete with the amount of supporting this guy can do. My favorite mic check was this guy playing Tom Kentram Baron. He's just like, I eat you, I have saved you, I have successfully saved you. I am the greatest support in the world. He
does sound like a mad annoying teammate. Like, it's the thing where, like, if you win in the game, I bet you're loving it. But, like, I remember when he first joined this G2 team and there was like one of those mic checks, so it was just him talking the whole time to Perks. And Perks was just looking over like, Jesus Christ, have a Korean there that was just playing the game. Does this guy ever stop? Someone could take one of the batteries out the back. Fucking hell. It was too much, wasn't it?
Yeah, he is a full of energy player. I love Jankos so much. My favorite interview with him was when he was just like, I love playing Braum. It's so much fun. I'm having a lot of fun. I want it to stop though. If it could stop, that would be great. I hate my life, but I'm having a lot of fun. I'm really enjoying and the constant conflict within him that he's trying to say, it's good for the team, but my life is miserable. But I think he's done a great job. I think he works with Perks extremely well. And I think that was a large part as to why they made the funnel work so much. But to me, he was like one of the big question mark points in the G2 versus Misfits game. I feel like he made a couple of like really good plays, but also a couple of big mistakes. And I know like when you talk to the players, a lot of them say that game fundamentally came down to the draft, and the G2 drafted a comp that they should have lost much harder in the early game than they did. And even though there were a couple of minor mistakes, that wasn't the bigger overarching issue. But yeah, when I looked at Jankos in that game, he made like 2 or 3 crucial mistakes that allowed Misfits to gain some pretty significant leads. And he's just one of those players that I still think is one of the best junglers in Europe. I still think that he's in very close contention with Maxtor. I think you can make an argument that either one could be considered the best. But right now, it feels like it's easier to say for Misfits because they're 8-0. But Maxtor just seems like slightly more consistent. And I do wonder if that's just because Jankos has put so much effort into understanding this new way of playing jungle and playing more of a supportive role, if he is just getting back into the hang of playing these carry junglers, or if it's just a thing where he just had a bad game and he was off and he'll be back on form next week.
It's weird because I can see elements where funnel is super good for G2 and then also elements where it's really bad for them. I think that the elements where it's really good for them is obviously they have issues. They easily have an identifiable like amazing carry, and they can use top lane as a pressure point to get people ahead, get them ahead, and it's very easy to play like that for them. But at the same time, I feel like not having Jankos as a jungler is makes them more annoying. I don't think funnel is a good way to play the game. I think that we've discussed this already, and there are ways that G2 make it work that are very, very particular and very, very, but they're also very, very hinging on particular points in the game to succeed, like their level 1 setups and stuff like this. So ultimately, I do think that not having Jankos like actually jungle is sort of a loss, to be honest.
What are your thoughts on funnel?
I mean, so I said this on broadcast. I think the thing about funnel, at least when it was first iterated, is that there's very little responsibility on the team that plays funnel to be especially proactive. I think you put a lot of emphasis on the enemy team looking to take advantage of the fact that there is no jungler. Normally, the bot lane isn't a high pressure bot lane, and you either have a tank engage in top, or in G2's case, sometimes they would have a carry. But there are many points of entry with which you have to attack. But the emphasis is on you to be proactive. If you're the funnel, you just have to make sure that you're paying attention to where you're farming, what you can farm, making sure that you're being efficient with your resources and holding onto vision control very effectively. So I think it's it's not a healthy way to play the game, because I think there should be more responsibility on you rather than just waiting for level 16 and 3 items and then you kind of automatically win the game. I've never really been a fan of the funnel. I can understand why it works, but I don't know if I think it's a bad way to play the game, because I don't agree that there's no reliance on the funnel to have no agency, because I think if you're not able to do anything proactively as the funnel, it's really, really easy to lose fast, especially if you don't have a jungler set up. And there are ways that G2 have made sure that they still have pressure on the map, even without a traditional jungler in a sense, and that's why that they're succeeding with it, and a lot of other teams are struggling with it. So I really don't think it's like a passive, non-interactive style of play. Like I generally have disagreed with that assessment when it's come up, but given that information, I think it's like much easier and it's much more optimal to just have a jungler ultimately, especially if you have a jungler like Jankos. So.
Okay. What about, so obviously in this particular case, there's been a whole bunch of games where Perks was just absolutely carrying the living fuck out of the game, and that was exactly what he was intended to do. Does it surprise you that, like, is there something about how G2 does it that makes it work more? Because that's the first thing I thought when I saw this strategy used, was like, right, what's going to happen is any team that's a bottom LCS team that has a really good player is going to be like, right, well, this is our chance. You just got to put everything in this guy, hope he can go ham. But actually, most people don't do that. Even the ones who do the funnel sometimes switch up who the person who's getting all the gold is. So why has G2 been able to do it in such a kind of telegraphed manner?
Well, I think one of the big things is, as Kelsey mentioned, is that G2 are particularly proactive with their use of the funnel comp. In particular, they would often go top lane a lot. Wonder would play things like Ornn that people would often draft Mundo into, and then they would just hard camp the Mundo early. You'd have Braum Kai'Sa going up top relatively quickly with Ornn level 6, and then you just dive the tower and you do this over and over and over again. And then the bot lane would just kind of tank a surprising amount of ganks. Morgana, Tahm Kench, very difficult bot lane to kill. You can try and camp it, but with Black Shield and the consume on the Tahm and the grey health and like stopwatch Zhonya's Morgana and the amount of wave clear that it has, it's just super obnoxious, and it feels like that there are no points of attack when you do it against G2, which is why I think that it's worked so well for them, and teams have struggled to figure out what they can do, and many of them have just tried to ban away certain supports to try and limit their feasibility, but then they demonstrated that, they banned 80 carries at first, so they took away the Kai'Sa, they tried taking away Lucian, and then they just did it with Zyra Khan, and they were able to beat Fnatic with that draft as well. So they just kind of demonstrated that by being proactive, that you can do a lot, but it very much came down to the draft in that they look to often play through top, they look to try and get early ganks up top, and their bot lane would just play a hard survive lane, and it was most commonly things like the Morgana Tahm Kench that just became really, really difficult to kill. So I think all these factors together enabled G2 to find a lot of success with it, which is why teams have often struggled.
Kelsey, is it a good or a bad thing in your book that Dr. Mundo is the most played champion in Europe with a 71% win rate?
I mean, it's strong, so I guess it's good that teams are playing it, but is it good that the champion is strong? I don't know. It's kind of a really annoying champion, and I think that the way that Riot went about nerfing it so you can't just like cleaver farm in bad matchups is a good way to nerf it, by nerfing the health that you get back from hitting minions or whatever. So I think that's good, and hopefully we see less of Mundo oppressiveness because of that. So
I think it works a lot though, because we've talked a lot about playing through top, and the thing about Mundo is he is weak in the early game, and even when he gets his ulti at level 6, he's still diveable, and you can still kill him relatively easy. And there are a lot of good diving champions in the game right now for towers, but teams just don't like to play through top lane because, we've already talked about playing through mid or bot is kind of the preferred strategy. You have a lot of roaming supports too, so trying to get that early mid tower, trying to get an early Drake or Rift Herald is kind of important. So teams don't really try to snowball through top because it's just often tanks, and that's why Mundo ends up becoming really quite oppressive. Combine that with the fact that there's just more AP as well, like AP bot laner, sometimes you AP mid, and the only AD damage is coming from your jungler, means that he can also he naturally stacks him off. So he does so many things well, and teams aren't looking to try and shut him down either, that I think that makes him really safe. He's really difficult to deny, I guess, because teams won't look to play through him, and he fits into pretty much any comp as well. So he's pretty well rounded and pretty strong.
I do think because of how he can lane, it's not necessarily super simple to just dive him, because it's often sometimes not the most straightforward thing to just build up a wave against him and dive him, because of the way that he can still trim the wave, not necessarily get punished for farming and things of that nature. So yeah, he's just a difficult champion. I agree, he can be shut down early, but there are things about his kit and the way that he's playing right now that makes that not as straightforward as it could be.
For sure, of course.
So if we just look at the standings, Fnatic looks fine. They're in a good spot, still plenty of time left. But realistically, they've lost their games to the top teams. Where do you see Fnatic at the moment, Kelsey?
Fnatic, yeah, I guess they're the third team that have just... It's interesting because I think partly from having just really, really good players, teams like G2, Fnatic, and Misfits didn't have to really struggle to find something that they could play and perfect, whereas a lot of other teams probably suffered a crisis of, oh my god, this isn't working for us, maybe we should try something else, and then just spent so much time doing that, whereas obviously teams that are expected to succeed with really, really, really strong players will find something that they're having success with early on. And maybe it's interesting because that's the thing that they end up just going with, and they're able to go with that and not look back. And I think that that's been helpful for them. Fnatic are weird though, because I do think that more than G2 and Misfits, they're getting stuff out of having just good players and forcing skirmishes around caps and not necessarily having the best map play ever, but being able to constantly snowball off of any type of catch or anything like this and take over the game that way.
Does it say anything about the state of the game at the moment, Kelsey, that even though they are absolutely telegraphed as to who the starting lineup's going to be, that it's not going to be Reckless, they're not going to be playing Eddie carries, they still win a lot of their games?
Sure, I think it says stuff, but it's not necessarily. It doesn't necessarily say that AD carries are bad. I don't think that that's necessarily what you should take away from Fnatic doing well. I think what you should take away from that is that playing around scuttles is good, and that Baron is weak, and you can get super good leads from just playing bruisers or mages bot and going Baron and winning games. Yay! Woo.
So Vedius, you mentioned earlier that obviously, I mean, I'd love to see the actual stats on this. I want someone to track the Twitch stats for when a Fnatic game is coming up, and then when the pleb that's just a casual realizes Reckless still isn't in the game, how many tune out? Because obviously, everyone who is just a fan of Fnatic or a girl wants to watch Reckless play in the LCS. We understand this. He is the Scandinavian wonder boy for good reason. Are you cool with watching games where it's just Whippo playing all the time and they just play bruisers? Are you really cool with that, Vedius?
I mean, I think Whippo as a personality is great. He is very confident. He has a very action-packed bot lane. But yes, I do miss having Reckless in the LCS. But I also had a very healthy conversation with Whippo because I've always been in the bandwagon, or originally I was in the camp of, I think Reckless needs to stop being a bit of a baby and just learn to, I mean, 80 carries still work. Why don't they just make it work? But with a little bit more discussion, what I've come to realize is in the past, Reckless has had like a lot of target bans towards AD carries, right? He's been pretty vocal about the fact that he prefers to play AD carries. He can't really play anything outside of that. And I think that even though AD carries are viable, there is a limited pool. And that's not uncommon to the AD carries. Sometimes we've had entire metas that revolve around 3 AD carries. But typically, he would be limited to things like Lucian, Ezreal, Xayah, Varus, right? And if you ban 3 of them and then you pick the 4th, he's kind of limited in what he can play. And right now, he's quite vocal about the fact that he's not comfortable on other options like Vladimir and Swain and things like that. So I think it makes sense from Fnatic's perspective that given you can play mages, bruisers in the bot and they are actually pretty strong, and the Reckless isn't as comfortable on these in the event that his AD carries would get banned out, it actually makes sense for Fnatic to not run him until he feels confident enough and understands the matchup well enough that they can put him back on the lineup. I do expect them to do it at some point. He's too talented at the game not to use him during the regular season. And I think that with changes that I read coming out on 8.15, where like I think Storm Razors is cheaper, Infinity Edge is cheaper, like AD carries are made a little bit more stronger, that might open up the AD carry pool. And if it does open up the AD carry pool, then Fnatic have to be less concerned about Reckless just getting target banned out. And if that's the case, then we could definitely see him come back into the team. But until then, I think that they're probably just going to stay with Bwipo and Soaz.
And this logic is really weird to me, because if the enemy team is banning 380 carries when there's all this other shit that you can ban, then that's actually a reason to play Reckless. Like,
Reckless, don't you want to open up the game for your team to carry? They get all their champions.
That's a valid point.
That sounds like a free win, to be honest. But it's so I don't really. I
like the way Reckless actually has become forgiving. He's like, oh, it's just 3 bans against me every game.
But it's like then he learns maybe 1 champion and it's a net gain, you know? If he just learns one extra champion, it's a net gain for them. They banned out his 380 carries and he learned 1 champion and they win the game off of that. It's good. But
strong counter.
So that's just like really bizarre to me. Also, it's also interesting because if you talk to anyone else on Fnatic, they're 80 carries are fine, you know. But if you talk to Reckless, he's like, no, it's doomed.
Reckless in interviews has been he's been really weird recently. Like that, like when he made that comment in that Travis interview where he said he benched himself. Like, why? What? Surely your coach benched you. What you mean is I agreed with my coach benching me. What do you mean you benched yourself? Why are you saying that? Like, that's what I love about him. He actually has in some mad way. Not obviously he hasn't gone full forgiven because no one can. Like this, you have to become forgiven. Like to make a normal man into forgiven would be like that scene in the original Street Fighter movie from the 90s where they create Blanca, and because it's not like just a fantasy movie, it's like trying to be realistic. Their premise for how you create Blanca, right, is they take like a normal soldier and they just pump him full of steroids habitually, and he has sort of like a VR type mask strapped on, and he's just watching like such violence that the idea is, I mean, obviously this is like the era when they thought watching like scary movies made you violent. That like, when he comes out of this from the steroids in the movies, he's just like an animal, he's just savage. So presumably, I don't know, something like that's happened to Reckless that's made him just turn into this beast. But this all of his comments in interviews don't line up with anything that his team says or what everyone else in the league thinks. Like, he seems to be a bit as far as I can tell, he's consulting with Loco. Like, AD carry's still not viable. No, I can't play him, mate. Nah. All right, I'm going to be benching myself now. Bwipo, you can play, mate. Well, I was already playing. No, I'm saying you can play. I'm saying I allow you to play. Like, come on, man. What's going on? What is this shit? Everyone else, I'm watching LCK every week. They're playing AD carries. What's he talking about? If people aren't going to ban out Deft with 3 champions, I'm pretty sure you can play Reckless.
The rate of standard bot lane picks went up in every single region this past week. So there you go.
There's something going on behind the scenes. I don't know what it is. Like, get the X-Files music on. Someone start figuring out a conspiracy theory. I don't know what we need to do. Also, by the way, I just want to say this. I also love interviews which are inadvertently hilarious. Like, that interview, I think it was Bwipo, right? Where he said that at Rift Rivals, like one of the excuses they gave was that Dylan Falco, the coach, hadn't slept for like 30 hours before the first game. Now that's great if we're in 1920, but I don't know if you've ever heard of this thing called melatonin. It helps you go to sleep. It's literally like the chemical in your brain that tells you to go to sleep. So why would you be awake for 30 hours? Like, you weren't on a fucking Amish farm for this tournament, you know? You did have access to these things. It's not like some controlled substance that you just buy at the chemist. What's going on? Why is everyone in Fnatic just whack? Why is everyone doing interviews but just saying mad shit that's off message? Like, at least coordinate the lies. Get behind the scenes and go, listen, right, I'm going to have a lie when I go in this interview. And go, all right, what are you going to lie about? Oh, glad you asked, because I don't want you to go out there and say a different lie. All right, yep, okay. Yep, we're all on message now. Yeah, that's how you do it. Stop letting the leaks out by just you fucking freestyling, just coming up with shit on the fly.
Well, I'm
fucking up the game.
Not entirely sure what's going on behind the scenes with Fnatic, but what I can say is they still win.
They do.
And a lot of that comes from, Kelsey mentioned earlier, a lot of early skirmishing. That bot lane is super kill heavy. Broxer, he's like really comfortable in champions like Kindred, which seems to be a new popular favorite of his, and he's really active. You see a lot of skirmishing, a lot of fighting in the early game, and they seem to... Like, when they get a lot of early kills, they win. When they die along the early game, they lose. Right now, they are a little binary like that. And Bwipo, I would argue, is a little inconsistent in that sometimes he overextends and dies. Right now, it's happening fairly regularly, at least like once or twice a week. But for the most part, as Kelsey said, they do have a lot of good players, and that helps them significantly. But right now, it's not enabling them to bridge the gap between them and the teams above them, which is why I'm quite looking forward to seeing how they play against Misfits on Saturday, because they didn't have... I mean, they played Janna last time. They did hard funnel, and then we had that crazy level 1 that happened where Misfits ended up getting like 2 kills or something stupid, and it was a crazy game where, Hansama also had Draven, and he had like 5 kills, and he kept killing the bot lane of Reckless and Hylissang. So I'm hoping this one will be a little bit more action-packed, and it should give us a better idea of where Fnatic is relative to the other top teams, and if Bwipo is that bot laner that is proved to be the better choice for Fnatic.
Because the weird thing is, Kelsey, like, on the one hand, the Fnatic doesn't play ever the standard comps, but they don't really run funnel that much themselves. Like, again, you'd think if it was just so viable, if you've got Caps for the same logic, surely you could just funnel into him and him carry the whole game. Based
on their first week games, obviously they were practicing it, and this seemed like something they wanted to do, but then... After that, it's really funny too, because if you watch the Rift Rivals interviews that Travis did there with the European pros, they're really funny, because someone will say something like, "Oh, I think it's just Reckless will say, oh, I think it's just regularly accepted that you can't play 80 carries anymore, you know," and then like someone on and then they'll also say, "I think it's regularly accepted that funnel is just really counterable and it's not good," and then G2 will talk about funnel, and then they'll say that, yeah, you can play 80 carry sometimes, it's whatever. And it's just everyone has a different idea of what is absolutely impossible to play, right? Which is really funny, because then they beat each other. And
well, that's the beauty of the meta, right? Is that when you make the meta really wide open, then everything you blame is just the stuff you can't make work yourself. Like, that's just unbeatable. It's unfair, really, and should be stopped. Why aren't you doing it? Oh, it's very counterable.
But I would say that Fnatic is an example of why you can't really call funnel non-interactive, because I would say that they played very non-interactive funnel and lost pretty convincingly. Early on, both times they played it, but obviously had the one comeback game. But I would say that was like really on not just mispositioning, but forgetting.
Schalke went to Dragon rather than Baron. I mean, they didn't even ward Baron, so yeah, it was definitely.
I mean, they didn't reset well. Like, they placed their wards and then reset, and then they went back. They're like, oh wait, the wards are gone. Whatever, let's go Dragon. It was just a really weird sequence of events. So, but I would say that in general, their funnel was very non-interactive, and they got punished pretty heavily for it, and probably should have gone to O2 the first week because of it. So,
okay, right. So again, similar question, I guess, to the last team. If they're going to continue to play this predictable manner and have the same flaws in the whole split, is this going to prevent Fnatic being our champion, coming through in the playoffs, being a fabulous team? I mean, it looks at the moment like, from all signs, it just looks like Reckless isn't going to appear this split, doesn't it? It looks as though they're going to wait for Worlds or see what happens there, unless they're doing some bizarre, like, miracle, bring him up for the playoffs. But that sounds to me like, it just doesn't really sound like a Fnatic move. But what do you think, Kelsey?
Someone has to win the EU LCS, Thorin. That's ultimately what it comes down to, is that, yeah, we can say their flaws will prevent them from being champions, but all of them theoretically have these types of flaws. So
there we go. Kelsey actually living up to the exact prophecy you gave before, Vedius, about how people analyze the EU LCS. See, in NA, they'd be like, the champions, crown the kings, what an epic era. Kelsey's like, well, someone had to win, so there you go. There's the fucking trophy. Get out. You played wrong. You played less wrong than the rest.
I mean, the people are talking about the PBE changes, and if they end up being significant, because they look significant, because it's like 200 gold off of every single crit item, you know, all this other shit, then Misfits will be the best positioned, because they haven't really changed up how they're playing. Also with the changes to funnel, which Krabs has been already vocal on Twitter that they don't matter, but we'll see what happens in EU LCS, I guess. So I think that gives Misfits an advantage to go ahead, and I think even if the meta doesn't change, then Fnatic are missing a lot of things that G2 are, and G2 and Misfits aren't, in terms of how they're just playing out their overall macro of the game. So there you go.
Okay. Right. When we talk about Vitality, Vedius, listen, I'm a simple man. I enjoy watching Vitality lose. I enjoy them
lose.
Thinking they can win. Yeah, of course. What the fuck are you talking about? Listen, if there was ever a group of people who I don't root for as an underdog, it's got to be the fucking Vitality team.
Okay.
Like, I even more enjoy when they try to run the Fnatic style comps, also lose. Enjoy that as well. In many ways, Vitality for me is like the new Unicorns of Love. Every time they win, I just sort of go, yeah, whatever. Congrats, I guess. Fuck off. So anyway, what do you think of Vitality? Presumably not quite as embittered as I am.
I'm actually really curious. Why don't you like Vitality, Thorin? What's your beef with Vitality?
I just think their whole team's whack. Like, I think even their style's pretty garbage. I don't think any of their players are actually legit. They're just whack. They're just whack. You know, like, they're the sort of people where if they win, I start trying to, like, Google stuff like, is this champion broken or something? Is there some reason why that's like easy to do or something? Like, basically, I'm just a hater. Like, I'll straight up admit I'm just a hater. It's not even just because of Gilius. Like, I don't even get triggered by Gilius's comments. I told you before, the fact that he's not really like that great a player means it doesn't really register on me that much, you know. But I mean, I just look at them as a team. I don't feel like any of these players are going down in history as like Hall of Fame players. When they get wins, like, okay, they do all right, you know. They're not a terrible team, but it's like they're so bland to me. I don't really enjoy them. And then when I saw them in this new meta, where it's like, if you're going to be a Unicorns of Love, just embrace it. Just go all out. Do the most whack shit in the game that's just the cheesiest. They don't even really do that. They're trying to be like, yeah, we're like Fnatic. We got good players too, and we can just run whatever we want. It's like, can you really do it? I don't know if you can. So all I'm saying is I just get a schadenfreude out of enjoying watching them lose.
That's fair. All right, fair enough. Each to their own. So it's funny that you mentioned the Unicorns of Love, because recently we've been looking a little bit into how Vitality play, and like we noticed that we keep falling into this crutch of saying that, you know, they get an early lead and then they just run away with it, which is kind of like a little overgeneralized. They kind of adopt the old Unicorns of Love star, which is the group mid and run it down, and something that they often do is
say it. Certainly.
What you'll notice is they spend a lot of time mid lane, like a lot of time, and they generally prefer to fight over like controlling sideways, setting up vision, taking the proper steps. If the game is like relatively even, if they've got like a really big snowball, then they play like they play a pretty smart game. They use pressure waves pretty smartly, and then they get the deep vision, and you know they contest over neutral objectives. They do all that. But if the game is kind of even, then an often strategy is like they clear out the wave side and they just group mid and they look to force fights. And the fact that they just group up so much means that sometimes even when they fall in deficits, they've been able to pull it back. but it's just a very linear style that isn't very reliable, because if you're just constantly going to group mid and try to fight, when they played against Misfits last week, like that's kind of how they fell apart too, because they didn't play their early game perfectly. They didn't utilize the fact that they had Nocturne. He didn't ult within like the first 15, 20 minutes or whatever. So they didn't try and snowball early game, even though they got a kill 2v2 bots. But then when they got to the mid game, all they tried to do was fight. Like they tried to fight over Dragon, they tried to fight over Baron, they tried to fight mid lane. And even though they were kind of winning a couple of fights, it only took one bad fight for the Misfits to suddenly take control of the game. They got Baron, and then Vitality didn't have anything left. And Vitality is also the kind of team that when they're behind, they don't like to sit and do nothing. They like to try and prove proactive, so they still try and fight you. So I think they're quite an exciting team to watch, because they generally try to do a lot of stuff. But for me, they are a clear number 4, because their style is very much, if we're not snowballing, then we're just going to try and outfight you, because I think you kind of said they have a lot of confidence in their players, and they think that they can outplay a lot of their opponents. And Attila is someone that I will give a lot of credit to. I think that he is very talented, but Jizuke I don't think is having the best split, because Gilius doesn't play around him as much. And I also think Jack Troll in team fights is not as impactful as he has been in the past. So I don't think that they're team fighting is as strong as perhaps they believe it to be, at least against the top teams.
It's weird because they didn't, like, you would think that Nocturne would be someone that you wouldn't necessarily want to super fight mid with, but they weren't going to necessarily get side pressure with the matchups that they had. So this was like one of those situations where I kind of accepted that they would just go mid anyway, but overall I agree with your criticism of Vitality. I do think that they tend to, like, what they do is they get TP advantage and then they group fight somewhere with the TP advantage, and then they just keep doing that over and over again until they win the game. So they're interesting, but I do think that they have a certain amount of energy, and that's been very, very good for them overall. It's just like that they play the game a lot, and they're constantly looking for stuff to do. It's funny because they were constantly characterized as this team that they're wacky and zany and you never know what they're going to do next game, but they do have a very predictable fundamental formula. And so it's just kind of they're a funny team in that sense.
I also actually will just say, as a general trend, I hate teams that only play to their level, like they lose to all the teams above them and just beat all the teams below them, because I find that the most whack team. There's no excitement in the match in that sense. I want a team that either has like great variance, or they're like so epic they can play with the top. Like I don't like, this looks like a team to me that like makes the playoffs and just gets rolled straight out. Like, they're not going to the finals. There's no miracle run here. There's no Cinderella story. There's nothing. There's just Vitality. That's it. That's all there is.
I mean, that's a little of what happened last split. I mean, everyone expected them to beat Splyce, though, in the 3rd place. And then all of a sudden, Niski played like a god, and Jizuke had one of the worst performances that he's ever had. But
really? Sorry.
I mean, when I was speaking to Yamato, he was telling me a lot about how Jizuke really struggled to perform like he normally does on stage, and that he was getting caught out left, right, and center, and that he's died 1v1 to Niski, I think, twice in that 3rd place match. So I definitely think that Jizuke did not have the best series, and it was something that a part of it I think could have been down to nerves, his first time on a big stage, but also I think maybe the pressure got to him too. Don't know. I haven't actually asked him directly about what it was about, but I definitely do not think that he played particularly well in his 3rd place match.
I'm just surprised to hear that people expected them to beat Splyce.
Oh,
I guess.
Listen,
yeah.
He already said before, he's trying to become like an NA caster. He's like believing in people, he's getting narratives going. It's like, these are the young underdogs.
I mean, the way he framed it, he was like, everyone expected them to win the 3rd place match.
Right, that's
like,
fair.
Really? What?
Yeah. I expected Vitality to win the 3rd place match. I thought their early game centric style would be effective against the Splyce's more mid to late game centered style. And I also thought there was a big discrepancy in the mid lane matchup. And I thought that Gilius Jizuke would be a stronger duo than Xerxes plus Niski. Turns out I was wrong.
Right, Schalke, Kelsey, as people could probably guess, I mean, I've made this pretty clear every time I look at their lineup, I still look at it and I'm like, this should be a pretty good team. Like, there's some pretty good players here. I even saw, like, a couple of games they tried to run the funnel. I thought this could be fucking sick. Like, oh, this is it. I was ready to get hyped, unlike when I'm watching Vitality play. But there's still some disconnect between these players. Why isn't this team as good as I imagine they could be? You don't have the same hopes for them, or don't believe in their potential?
I think that there is an improvement within the split just because there is decisiveness happening. However, I don't necessarily think that Amazing is the most thoughtful jungler, I guess, is the best way to put it, because I see him like doing stuff where he'll want to go to one camp and then he'll like pause and he'll not be sure if the other jungler's there or not, and so he'll just walk away, or he'll go and the other jungler will be there and he has to flash, and so he just seems kind of like he's really inefficient now in the early parts of the game. So Schalke,
I mean, he was literally called the worst player in the whole EU LCS by a bunch of the pros in that interview.
So Schalke have struggled, I think, a bit to find sort of a game plan that's definitive in the early game, but I would say that overall their mid to late game calls improve when they do have leads or when they're even, but you'll see them just have games where they aren't getting in a turret. Like there was a weekend where they just don't get a turret, they hardly get a kill. They're just not sure what they're doing exactly. It's just like plagued by indecisiveness, and it's been characterized as they're trying to play too perfectly, and I just don't think that they necessarily have a plan going in. So that would be my criticism of Schalke, but I do think that they have improved overall in terms of what they want to do.
So I will say that for Schalke, they are very similar to Vitality, not in their play style, but something that you greatly dislike, Thorin, in that they have lost to the teams above them and they beat the teams below them. Yes. So they are a dead set middle of the pack team that right now have struggled to really challenge the top teams. And I think, yes, we have definitely used that on broadcast, which is they are trying too hard to play perfect. But there can also be
some would say they're not trying hard enough.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they are just they largely played scared, right? It's one of those situations where they read a situation and they sit and think, what are the odds of this plan working out in their head? And then they sit there and go, oh, there's only like a 30-40% chance, maybe 50% that this works out. And they won't take the gamble. They don't want to run the risk. So they just don't do it. And you end up with these games where they end up not doing anything because they just feel like no one's actually making the decision for people to follow. And that was a big issue for them last split. And the point of bringing Amazing in was to have that person that would sit there and go, guys, we're making this play, and people would follow him. And then you would hope that with the experience that he has as a player, that he would be able to make the correct decision more often than not. And then that eventually builds confidence in people, and then they look to be more proactive and they look to try and force more things. But upon his return to the EU LCS, that was evidently not the case. He wasn't exactly quiet about the fact that he definitely has a lot to learn and that he was definitely quite rusty. But right now, based on chatting to him, he feels a lot more confident in not only his own ability, but how he works with the team. And when you look at their game versus Splyce, yes, they did get Aatrox, which definitely helps. But I also like the fact that we saw Vander roaming around the map a lot. We saw the fact that Amazing was actually looking to play towards a game plan, which was the enemy team had a Rumble, Splyce had Rumble Kindred. They didn't want to allow the Rumble Kindred to snowball, so they actually put a lot of their resources into trying to shut down the Rumble in the top lane. And because they had constant mid priority, again, thanks to the Aatrox that for some reason was left open, it made it super easy for them to just constantly play through topside. And so they had a game plan, they had a strategy, and they actually played towards it, and they were pretty effective at it, which is good, or at least good signs for Schalke. But that really kind of only puts you in a place where you're, again, kind of middle of the pack, because there's nothing really that stands out about you. It just means that you can play a draft the way it's supposed to be played. You can execute upon a plan, but there's nothing right now that stands out for me about this team that would enable them to take down the top 3 or the top 4 in Europe.
Well, when you say that about amazing, by the way, that like he doesn't think he's at like his best form now, but he's hoping to get there. The thing with amazing is, it's I'll paraphrase the old joke about vegans. It's like, how do you know if amazing thinks he's good? Well, don't worry, he'll tell you. Like that'll be the first thing he fucking says. So yeah, we're all fully aware of where he's at the moment, right? Here's a question for you, Kelsey. I'm going to pull a pure Thorin. I've told everyone I'm back, so this is going to be proof of it, okay? So a pure Thorin is where you think you've seen something in the game, you're willing to go out there, bold, say it, potentially just be talking complete shite, but whether right or not, in doing so, hopefully either provoke interesting discussion or bait players into making some nice drama. So here we go. I am actually sick. I have for a long time enjoyed watching Nukeduck as an individual player, because I've always thought actually he's been, I mean, I realise in different times he's been overrated, but I have always thought one sense about him that was underrated is he always manages to get a viable champion pool. He's always pretty good no matter which team's around him, like he finds his way to play. But the one thing I actually despise about watching him play is I have now seen him in numerous teams in his career have the same like team story surrounding his teams, which is that they play, it's going okay, they get into situations where it looks like, right, we'd have to either be really ballsy and super decisive here, or we could just wait and hope that like a good scenario comes. Like, no, we'll wait. We'll just wait a bit more. We'll wait a bit more. And he does basically what I consider like the negative aspect of being a good player, which is some players who are good individually never want to be the one who like loses the game in that sense. Okay, so what they do instead is they think to themselves, I'll keep waiting for like, a big opening to show itself, or like something to happen later in the game, or me to get a little bit ahead in farm. And the problem with doing that is, unless you have an amazing team, sometimes you have those games where it's like you basically just wait 20 minutes extra to lose the game. And it's probably the least enjoyable fan experience I can think of. And the reason why I have to bring it up for Nukeduck is, he's the only member that's the uniting thread on all these different teams I'm thinking of. Going back to the old Roccat, even the NIP that didn't make an LCS this season in this team. I won't say it for the Vitality team, I think it was a little bit different, but it does seem to have followed him around his career. Now, Kelsey, why is that entirely wrong?
Generally, I mean, I guess going back to a little bit more about what Vedius said as well about they're not sure it's like a 30% play. A lot of the times when that sort of indecisiveness happens, it's because you're really bad at tracking the enemy jungler. Like that's one thing. Okay. And you're just like, you're not sure where the enemy jungler is, so you don't know how your play can go out, or you're not sure where the enemy team is or how the play will go out. I would say a lot of Nukeduck's problems is that they're really bad at knowing when, like, mid to late game, when the enemy team may have backed and it's safe to move forward and contest vision. So that's something that, like, really, really stalls out games for them. And I would say that's a consistent thread throughout the career. I don't know if it's just, like, he's bad at communicating, like, that part of the setup of the game, or if he takes it as his responsibility and drops it, or something like this. It's weird.
Sometimes
that it would be one player,
I also used to sometimes wonder if it was like, lack of trust in a specific teammate or something. Because, it feels a bit like what happens when you see like some pro players playing solo queue. And like, if the game's going badly, they're like, right, I'm just gonna chill back and just do what I can do. And then if we lose, whatever, who gives a fuck, but there's like a pro game.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like I said, it's weird that this would be like a one player problem, because it should be more of a team problem.
Yes.
And to just say, like, I would say that's what happened to them in the Fnatic game, where they were just, like, not really sure about the timing of when it was safe to go get wards down again. And so they just didn't for ages. And then they went Dragon and lost Baron, and that was it. So, yeah.
Basically, Nukeduck, as a mid laner, is like those condoms they designed that have the numbing gel agent, where all it does is it just extends the experience for about 10 to 15 minutes. But you know what the flaw is? There's a reason, Vedius, why we're not all using them. Is that it extends the experience, but it numbs you. So why the fuck would I want 10 more minutes of this when I'm numb? I can't feel anything. There you go. There's your analogy. Don't tag on to that. But just come in with something different. Keep moving.
Thorin prefers bareback. There we go.
No, I just use the normal ones, and I just live with whatever the outcome is, and I make up for it in other ways. Just, I've got lots of options. I'm not one-dimensional, Kelsey. So, Vedius, come on.
What I will say is, whenever I kind of evaluate and look at Nukeduck, I sit there and go, would he make the same plays that Perks would make, right? And half the time I think that he wouldn't. That time when like that epic play, funnily enough, it was Perks versus Nukeduck, where Perks travels halfway through the jungle on Zoe and then sees Nukeduck sitting in a side lane going up against his top laner, and he comes out of nowhere, makes a massive one-shot outplay against Nukeduck that he wasn't expecting at all, and he kills him. And the fact that he dies ends up stalling the game out for G2 for like another 2 minutes so they could stay alive in the game. And those kind of big hallmark outplays, or the willingness to kind of take that gamble and go for something, is, in my opinion, what separates the good players from the great ones. You know, because you always think of people like, I mean, you think of Uzi, you think of Faker, you can put Perks up there if you want, but people who are just willing to take the gamble and
almost every great player, I would say, is defined by proactiveness. That's one of the reasons why the old Reckless, I also didn't buy that he was like the best AD carry. You know, like he just didn't really have that in his DNA.
It's true. Yeah. I agree, and I just think that's something that Nukeduck is lacking, and is kind of. I don't think he always lacked it, because I think back to season 3 when he was on Lemon Dogs. And back then, I was actually a big fan of him. I thought his playstyle was super cool, and I really enjoyed what he could do. But over the years and on the different teams, like, I just kind of agree with you in that this has somewhat followed him, and he hasn't succeeded.
To be fair, like if I'm trying to think of like a different period of time, okay, where like to use like the psychological concept, like the imprinting happened, where this is just, you know, when he's in that situation, this is why his brain reacts that way. I don't think it was a great idea in season 4, where they essentially played without a real jungler every time they played LAN matches. So essentially, yeah, he definitely doesn't know where the enemy jungler is or whether he's got any help. He's like, we're just playing 4v5 here. Let's probably not going to take any chances on this one. It's not the great. And then now he has amazing. Insert your own joke there. Insert your own joke. Right, anyway, so Kelsey, is there any hope though for Schalke? I mean, like beyond Nukeduck, are some of the other players just not utilised well, or has the level dropped? I mean, they've got VeXii. Obviously, people still rave about Upset with his potential. This should be a better team, shouldn't it?
I would say that this is a team where the players haven't really changed from how they were when they signed. You know, in general, it's like what you see is what you get. And VeXii is a player who, I mean, it's funny, we talk about junglers not existing. I don't think he actually believes in the existence of junglers, just typically. He's not even aware it's a role. Yeah. Both his and the enemies. So I think that's been fairly, like, he can be a very lane dominant player in some situations, and he often did very, very well in 1v1 settings, or where he where his jungler was constantly bot side, like on Unicorns of Love and stuff like this. But he has a tendency to overextend and be very, very open to ganks and getting punished in 2v1 scenarios. And so I think that has been an occasional problem with VeXii. He also, I think, got solo killed recently. I remember, because he wasn't familiar with the matchup, or maybe that was the other.
G2, no, it was G2.
Yeah, and so he's had some weird peculiarities there. And then bot lane, I think, like, banter can be a pretty strong support, and I think that one of the things that's a bit underrated in terms of like their recent wins is how Amazing's been working just with banter on the bottom side of the map, and I think that's been effective. And then Upset likes to play these kind of like more farming ADCs. So we're still sort of getting this sort of formula, and we already talked extensively about Nukeduck, and I think that we're just like, we're working with fixed pieces, the players aren't changing, and so if they could get wins off of like the Amazing factor or whatever else, then I think that's good for them. I do think Amazing is something that the team needs, because I feel like the team was lacking not just someone to make a call in general, but just like leadership straight up. So
Right, Kelsey, it's well known to anyone who follows the show that we're not big fans of Roccat in pretty much any context, actually. But okay, we'll say as a League of Legends team right now in the game. So we're not huge fans of them. Obviously, you were pretty harsh on that lineup when they put it together, where, you know, listen, I agreed with you at the time, by the way. Like, on paper, it looked like the worst attempt at importing Koreans. It was like you literally, like, you know, it was like your flowchart for importing Koreans was, do they have a Korean passport? Yes, welcome to the team. You know, there wasn't really a logic as to why they did it. But, and first of all, I know you were fairly complimentary towards Memento. This team has kind of punched above their weight. So what positives can you say about them? How have they done this? How do they keep getting away with it?
Speaking of jungle and supports, you know, working together, I do think the Memento Norse Garen is the highlight of this team. And I don't really praise their Korean players, and I haven't really, and I don't necessarily think that they stand out. So I'm not going to. But I will say Memento and Norse Garen are really, really good players. They've played together for a little bit. This is their third split together in a row. And they have like kind of an obsession with vision control. And if they're constantly thinking about wards and placing wards, then that is an element of play that will evolve for the team, even as time progresses. And they work together really well. And I think that if you have like a solid bone structure, and by bone structure, I mean like your jungle support, your supportive elements, then that really just allows the lanes, the carries to just focus on like kind of their one-dimensional job and getting ahead in that sense. And so I think that that's what's really working for Roccat right now.
See, I like the terminology there, but I think it has to be tweaked, because here's the thing, like if it was like a good skeleton or a good backbone, I think that makes sense. Bone structure, that's only something people say when they're like complimenting a woman with nice cheeks. To be fair, you have pretty good bone structure, Kelsey.
Well, see, they're specifically, even if the woman's like cheeks are nice, you know, you're not talking about the flesh, you're just talking about the bones, right? Yes. So it's still kind of.
So in a way, it's kind of a mad backhanded compliment, because it's like the bones inside your head are pretty good. The rest of it, just stay clear. Like it's true. Yeah. In a way, you've sort of dissed them by complimenting the players that don't do any of the carrying. I like that. Yeah, well done. I'm following you on that one. What do you think, Vedius?
So I've been kind of like a fan of Roccat. I was in the same boat as
Why
Kelsey.
would you do that though?
I thought that this lineup would be hot garbage. I thought that they would be bottom of the barrel. They would sit alongside Giants at last split, and I thought they would be rubbish. But then they started showcasing some really good aspects. The one thing that I was most impressed with was their ability to set up around Baron and their vision around Baron and how patient they were around Baron. So if the game was ever like in their control and they were just ever so slightly ahead, the way in which they played around that objective was like a high level team. They actually showed a lot of really positive things that impressed me. And I still feel like they have a lot of those same attributes. The problem is the game is much more early game focused. And I think that's been a bit of a struggle for them, unless Memento successfully finds early kills. And one of the things that I feel I've noticed a lot with Roccat is Memento and Norse Garen will often roam around the map around level 6 to try and look for early ganks or early kills, with which they then generate an early lead, and they then know what to do with an early lead. Because as long as Memento has an advantage, he then feels more comfortable going for more skirmishes, and then they just try to force a lot of early game plays. And usually happens a lot around blank. Usually they put him on things like Zoe and Lissandra, stuff that is really easy to set up with, has good 2 versus 2, and they just then kind of, they play around that area of the map, and then everything works out. But if they don't find it, then they end up losing. And the problem is they don't have the caliber of players to be able to outplay or win those 2 versus 2 skirmishes against teams that are better than them. Like they lost to Schalke, they lost to Splyce, they lost to Fnatic, and they've lost to G2. They did win against Vitality, but arguably that was a really weird game, and you can debate whether or not they should have won it. But the reality is, like, the quality of their players so far doesn't seem to be that much better. I don't think they're terrible, but they are kind of average, I guess. And so unless something dramatic happens in the quality of their players, or they find a strategy that's really effective that other people can't deal with, I feel like they're always going to be sitting around that 6th place spot, like 6th, 7th place spot, where they can probably make it to playoffs, but they're going to really struggle to really challenge any of the other teams in like a title, just because I don't think that the caliber of their players is good enough to be able to rely on the strategy of let's just win a couple of these early skirmishes, because they just can't.
Enough said about that then. Right, let's talk then about Splyce. So Kelsey, when we did the Rift Rivals episode, I think it was pretty clear to everyone that you think that Splyce is a pretty good example of a team that only is at Rift Rivals because of the qualification method, probably isn't a very good team and is a pretty flawed squad. Now, how does that transition into what we currently see? I mean, to be fair, at least they have started trying to run some weird comps. Before they were just losing and just running standard. So where's Splyce at the moment?
I think Splyce...
Oh, sorry, I thought you were muted. Keep going.
I would guess Splyce are kind of a team where they find something that works for them and they get it whenever they can, but when they don't get it, they struggle quite a bit. And I think that going into this new meta, they had to find new things that work for them. Their win against Fnatic, however, you saw two of their favorite things coming through, like the Camille and the Rakan. So that would be kind of where I'm seeing Splyce right now, is that they have like a really good grasp of how to play when they have certain picks that they're comfortable with, but then when they don't, they're just whatever stereotype you want to give about them, where they're kind of like dying earlier. And then they also, like, the highlight obviously is that if they can get a good 2v2 top lane, you know, that, and get a good kill from there, then they have a path forward. We know what to do now, and that's good for them. But if not, then sometimes they really have a hard time.
Yeah, I think I very much agree with that. I think that towards the top side of the map is where they found the most success last split. I don't know what to think of their bot lane, because last split I thought that they were just very consistent. Kasing maybe a little bit more of a wild card, but Kobe was just always someone that he was just pretty reliable as an AD carry. But this split he's kind of been all over the shop. I think he has really struggled to figure out what champions are good for him and what he feels comfortable on and how that integrates with the team. And I think early on, a lot of their losses came from the fact that this Splyce squad put a lot of emphasis on trying to play around their bot lane. And this is not a strategy that they really used last split, because it was always around Odoamne, making him the carry, making him someone who could carry the team. So at the start of the split, they really didn't know how to win games. And now more recently, they've actually been playing through topside. You talked a lot about the Camille. I think that's been a huge pick for Xerxes that he's found a lot of success with and he's very comfortable on. The fact that Rumble's back in the meta is makes Odoamne pretty happy. Aatrox was another pick that he was pretty comfortable on. And then when they play through topside, they seem to do well. But even then, their bot lane just doesn't feel really consistent or reliable. And even though Niski, I think, has had a better split and he's playing well, like, I don't think he's probably utilized. I don't really see him that much involved in the rest of the game. They don't play through him. They don't have him run around the map. They don't have him get involved. He just kind of stays mid and just does his job, I guess.
Unless he's on Twisted Fate.
Yeah, so I pretty much, this whole team to me is like, can Xerxes enable Odo? Yes or no? And if he can't, then they lose. And if they can, then they have a higher chance of winning. But which is kind of a shame, because when I look at this roster, I actually think that this is a really good team with a lot of good players. And the fact that they're 3-5 right now is very surprising.
I would say that it's weird, because obviously top is a pressure point for them. But part of the reason why they have to get a kill top so early is because of Kasing's champion pool, it's really hard to not play around bot. I would say, if he's going to be playing a lot of mage picks, then you kind of want to be playing around bot a lot.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah.
And so I would say that that's kind of been a weird map setup issue that they've had for them, and also it's been something that you can target in draft, and a bunch of other just systematic issues that Splyce have. So. Yeah.
Their drafts are weird, though. I do often question.
Are they a team that has jungler issues in terms of, like, the jungler seems to have issues working with certain players? I mean, he's a player whenever I've watched him play this split, like, he seemed decent in the spring split, and whenever I watched him in the summer split, he looked like a player who had no champion pool. Like, I don't even know if he has molecules of water in his champion. Like, what champions does he play?
Zach. This
seems like something of a flaw.
It was a big thing last spring where he did very, very, very well on Zach.
Yes.
But
he has had one game this split, hasn't he?
yeah, he played his Zach game at Rift Rivals. It was hilarious because their draft was like, oh, this is Spring Splyce.
Yeah, it was literally
their very
Spring
first
Splyce, yeah.
Rift Rivals draft was Spring Splyce, basically. And yeah, so he has played his Zach game this split.
I don't know if he has like champ pool issues because Trundle is still relevant in the meta. He was the guy that brought Trundle to Europe, and he feels pretty comfortable on it. Camille's another cool pick for him. I think Kindred he's pretty comfortable on. I just think so. Kind of tying back to what Kelsey was saying in terms of a game plan, when they get certain champions and they know how to execute upon what they have, then he looks really, really good. But when his instructions are like, you have to play through bot and it's something that they don't know how to do or something that they're not experienced with, and he ends up in this weird middle ground of like, I feel like I should do something, but I've been told that I'm supposed to do something else. You end up in this weird gray area where XerXes as a player I don't think has the experience or the knowledge to kind of make his own judgment call and then make the decision. Now, I don't know what goes on in his head in games, it's all just speculation, but in the games where Splyce lose, you very rarely see much presence from XerXes. We have our favorite stat of the split where he had 0% jungle proximity top lane, and I think in that game, Odoamne was playing like Aatrox or something, so he was told to play bot side, he didn't at all go top side, and the Aatrox didn't get any attention or any resources at all, but the bot lane didn't get ahead either. So it's just one of those situations where I think XerXes as a player is, when he has played the game plan and he knows what he's supposed to do, he looks very good. But outside of that, I think that he struggles.
Okay. Should this team be better in terms of their lineup of players? Like, am I just overrating some of them because of like past name value and stuff? The idea this team is below Roccat, like that just doesn't compute in my brain, basically.
I only think they should be better based on the caliber of players, but I also think that this meta really messed with them, and I still don't think they have a comfortable champion pool that they're all really happy with yet. I still think that they are figuring out, which is concerning, but maybe this is a bad analogy, but the analogy I often use is that it's a team of old dogs that don't like learning new tricks. And so, because they've been playing for a number of years, and that there's a lot of old habits that they're used to, it's just taking them more time than other pros to pick up the new or different stuff or adapt to the new stuff. But yeah, that's what it feels like to me, at least.
Yeah, okay. Based on, like I've said a couple of times, based on the end of last spring when I think a lot of people sort of figured out the Splyce appropriate ban list, that I knew that they were probably going to have a slow start this summer. But I do think that they're a team that can figure out stuff that works for them. And when they can get stuff that works for them, they obviously play very well. So I do think that they will have an uptick. So.
When I alluded, Vedius, to the fact that I didn't like the old unicorns a lot, that is just because like some of their players were like super gimmicky and they tried all this stupid shit, and it's like, the purist in me just doesn't want you to be allowed to win at League of Legends like that. Just being a hater again. The new unicorns I love, I dislike just because I don't like bad teams. I just don't enjoy watching rubbish teams play games. I don't know. Maybe I'm unique in that sense. I don't know how that works. So this has to be, to me, one of the most uninspiring lineups of players in any of the big leagues in the world. Give me your best NA LCS approach to the game. Tell me what's good about unicorns a lot in summer split. You can earn your money now, Vedius. Come on.
So the good things about the Unicorns of Love is the Cold Totoro duo. But I'll go before that, because one thing that I find really fascinating is you speak to any of the teams in Europe about scrims, and a lot of them say Unicorns is actually a pretty good team. They actually rate Unicorns surprisingly highly, right? And we ask them why, and they're just like, I don't know, they pick early game, they play really well around early game. Cold and Totoro are really good. Like Exile's like a top mid laner in Europe, and we're just like, whoa. Really? And then, you go into the game day and you're like, okay, this is great. All the teams are saying they're really good. And then they go on stage and then they try a level 1 with the final comp, and then they end up giving away 2 kills. And you're like, okay, this is not aligned with the information that I was told. And then when you speak to Cold afterwards, I was like, so I've been told you're like really good in scrims. What's going on? He's like, I don't know, bro. I don't know. So it's a weird one. We're hoping to bring a coach on to the analyst desk to talk a little bit about transitioning what you do in scrims onto stage. And it's fortunate.
Well, I mean, if Unicorns will ever get one, then get him on. But there you go. The inadvertent setup, a classic. So yeah, go on, keep going.
But if Kelsey might be able to shed some light on this, because I don't get to see scrims or know what goes on in scrims, but being able to translate scrim practice onto actual stage performance is something that I definitely think plagues the Unicorns of Love. And apparently they have all this potential and are a really good team that they have yet to show on stage. So perhaps Kelsey can help shed some light on what it's like to turn that from scrims to stage.
I mean, when we figure out how to do it, I'll let you know. So yeah, there's that as well. It's kind of it's really difficult. I think we scrimmed Unicorns a lot in spring, obviously, because we were in a similar position.
You get many other teams, yeah. We understand that works.
But so going into the summer, we kind of knew what they were doing, and we didn't have the same impression of them as I think other teams. But like it's difficult. It's really difficult because a lot of things are, well, maybe one player feels comfortable at home to say X in Y situation, but the same situation happens on stage and nerves or something happen and he doesn't say the same thing, so the same play doesn't happen. And that would normally happen in this situation. And then without that momentum, the game doesn't progress as it would normally progress in scrims. They're in a brand new environment after that they're not used to, and they have to play out the game from that, and they don't really know how to do it as well, maybe. So that type of situation happens a lot. It's not that uncommon. A lot of it does is comms related, and just like generally related to how you talk about the game on stage versus in scrims. When you feel relaxed or when you don't feel relaxed, what kind of play you see. Also, basically how other teams will play in scrims, because, people are testing their limits, right? Much more in scrims. People are playing like crazy and doing weird things, and it's like, okay, I'll just kill you. But then they don't do that on stage, so how do we play out the game now, etc. So I think that tends to be an issue that happens.
I mean, believe it or not, Vedius, this isn't a team that shocks me when I look at this lineup, where they are in the league. I mean, I'm going to give you a spoiler now. For all the three teams at the bottom, not the case. I'm not looking at this going, fucking hell, like that gif of that woman looking at all the mathematical equations. How did they lose, though? Like, no, that's not a problem for me. And in fact, when I look at this Unicorns of Love team, I don't know how this team was constructed. This looks like they actually recruited the team by playing Fantasy LCS on the League of Legends website. And if you like time out because you're busy getting a drink while your friends start it, and it just automatically picks you one randomly. It looks like that's what happened, and they come back like, what the fuck? I got called. I guess he's all right, but what the fuck? Where are all the good players? They're like, yeah, we picked those. We just left those for you. It's not a team I can see go, okay, I've got a question for you, Kelsey. Here's a chance for you to revisit a topic from before. When he said there, like in scrims are doing well, people are saying Exile is one of the best mids in Europe. Thoughts?
I mean, I think that this guy is always able to find a couple of champs that work really, really well for him in the meta, and then on other stuff he'll look really crummy. I think one thing that has been very good for Unicorns is theoretically on paper they should be the best funnel team in the history of funnel, because Cold is never anywhere but mid lane anyway. So
very true.
It doesn't really matter. But it's funny because it's like you notice that Exile has less experience than the other mid laner for some reason. It's like, oh yeah, because Cold is literally there for way more than most other junglers. So he's taking the experience from the mid lane. But I think that the thing about, it's such a weird team So I think that helps Exile a lot, is just because they do play through mid so much that it gets to this point where if there is one mistake that the enemy mid laner makes, then Cold is probably there, and you get a kill off of that, and that helps Exile look really, really good. So that's what I would say is a big strength of Unicorns. I would also say that that's a problem for them, because obviously that means that their map play is pretty one-dimensional and easy to read. You know that they're going to set this up, so if your mid laner plays intelligently and just always expects the jungler to be there, then the rest of your sides can play aggressively. You can get advantages against them in that regard. And Unicorns of really early game-centric playstyle sort of falls apart after that. So.
It does also look a little bit like, actually, to be fair, if you just look at the entire EU LCS for Season 8, it does look like some sort of European Union-backed conspiracy to make, like, as many nationalities as possible seem like they can fit in teams. Like, this is some sort of mad, like, our strength is our diversity scenario. It's like, I could believe that, like, you get, like, a 10% tax break on your country if, like, you have 5 different flags in the team or something. And so, like, only teams that really have money are like, oh, we can have 2 from the same team, but listen, we've got to get some of that kickback overall, some of that rebate, because these lineups are fucking mental. Like, you guys are pushing the concept that it's Europe, you know, like, there's Europe and there's different parts of Europe, you know. You can't just put a guy from fucking Finland with a guy from Germany with a guy from Spain with someone from fucking, where's that, like Serbia or something? What's that, Slovakia, I'm going to guess. Say Slovakia, and then just put a Korean in there as well.
Well, so interestingly enough, communication was an issue that they have had in the past.
That's crazy.
But one of the things that
but they all started learning Esperanto, and now next split they're going to be sick.
One of the things that they commented on about Totoro specifically is that his English is significantly improved this split compared to last split, and that's why him and Cold are working much better than they ever have, because they can communicate better. So now, rather than just one person in the mid lane, you often have 2. Now, the unlucky thing for the Unicorns of Love is that Sencux is the main AD carry, or bot lane carry, rather, that they have primarily been practicing with, and he has been sick recently. So they've had to rely on their...
He means Zill, by the way, in case anyone hadn't picked up the theme with this team yet.
And Neon is... Neon's, like, he's surprisingly good. He plays pretty well. He holds his own. Considering he's brand new to the LCS and he's only playing things like EU Masters, I think he's doing okay. But I imagine it's like a very strange dynamic of a team to be involved in, given that like so much of your playstyle is centered around the mid lane. And he often has to just fend for himself. And given that he is fending for himself, I'm surprised by how well he plays. And I'd be interested to see how the team does if they actually look to play through him and they brought Exile to the bot side of the map rather than just constantly play through mid. Because I do feel like that this guy so far has something there that is yet to be fully utilized.
I think Neon is really good. Just straight up, was very, very good in EU Masters on Millennium, and he's been pretty strong for a while, just floating around the almost LCS tier, I guess. So I'm really glad that he's getting some stage time. And when he was picked up, it was like instant in my head, oh, this guy's better than Sencux, you know. So I don't know. I guess we'll see how they decide to play that out.
Okay. What do you make, Vedius, of Giants Gaming? As you mentioned, last team, they were obviously one of the squads everyone just memed on, and they were another one where, you know, the lineup didn't exactly look fantastic. But what do you think of this team?
I mean, overall, I think they're a pretty weak team. I'm amazed that they beat G2. I don't think they did. It's a weird one because...
it's almost like just having the name Giants Gaming gives you like a fucking plus 10% aura chance to beat a really good team inexplicably.
Yeah, they have had that trend. Last split, they actually had a really good start to the split because they figured out, if you just pick team fight all the time, you're going to win, because at some point the game will require you to team fight because you need the Baron to end the game. And they figured that out really early on. Other teams kept trying to play 1-3-1 and all these other unique, like, let's play poke comps, let's just play split pushes. And Giants was like, no, we're just going to fight you at Baron, and you're going to lose, and we're going to take Baron, and we're going to win. And it worked for them for a while until teams figured it out, and then it stopped working for them. And this split, they definitely didn't come in prepared. They didn't have a good read on the meta, and I don't think that they've played to some of their strengths in Joko like they did last split. I feel like Ruin is on par to potentially be the worst top laner in Europe. I have been very unimpressed with what he's been able to do. He's solo dying a lot in lane. He TPs kind of sporadically and randomly, and I feel like that his impact in fights is very minimal. And he's just someone that's super easy to punish in lane as well. So I don't think they have a strong top laner. I think Steelback is not very reliable as an AD carry. I feel like that last week he played a little bit better. At least he provoked
that amazing comment from Forgiven, though. That alone, right, was like, that's going to be one of the highlights of this split of the EU LCS. Just Forgiven coming out and literally out of the shadows and just calling him a giga boosted fucking animal or something like.
It was definitely quite the comment, yeah.
That was legit.
And yeah, Steelback has not been amazing. Again, last week he had a better week. But he's still not someone that I would kind of rely on to be a big carry. VeXii was someone I kind of had my eyes on and thought, oh, he's actually having a pretty good start to the split, but the team never plays through VeXii. I've never really seen him like set up to be a carry. And Joko's kind of the only redeemable feature of this team for me, and that I do like the way that he plays early game. This meta I feel would really suit him. I feel like he does have a pretty deep champion pool, and based on his Nocturne play, against G2, I was actually really impressed with, like, that is a good example of how to utilize Nocturne and how you got a very early kill at level 2 top lane. You should have set up your laner for success. You're then clearing your camps very efficiently. You're getting a very early level 6, and when you hit level 6, you're then looking to use that ulti somewhere on the map. And I believe they used it bot, and because they just hard camp bot. So like, that was a good performance from him, and like, I look at Joko and I think he could be the redeeming quality, but then the rest of the carries just can't keep up. And this team has a really bad habit of just fighting really randomly. Like against G2, they tower dive mid when they didn't need to. They had a 2,000 gold lead. They could have set up around Baron. They could have set up around Dragon. They had so many options. Like, they could have controlled their side waves. They could have done anything with vision. No, we're going to dive mid. And then G2 want to fight, and then G2 weren't in a gold deficit anymore. And I was like, Giants, what are you doing? Why you do this? And I don't know. I just think that they don't really understand how to play good League of Legends. They just, they are lacking that. And the individual carries on their players are not talented enough to really compete with almost anyone else in the league. I think that they're a really weak team, and I don't see them really bouncing back throughout the rest of the split.
See, what's good there, Kelsey, is initially he spoke as though, he had expectations they could do something. And then at the end, when he summarized everything, he was like, don't have any carries. Jungle actually isn't good, but maybe, I don't know, possibly could be, but who knows? Don't know how to play as a team. And as far as I can tell, like, that fucking Sencux a lot must have brought him a hot chocolate, so he just left him out of it. He just said, leave him out of the disc. Everyone else is just trashed, though. Like, where do you weigh in on this team? I mean, to be fair, when I look at the squad,
gotta kind of give rookies like a bit of leeway,
Yeah, sure.
Shield them from the full onslaught. There you go. Whereas people like Steelback have been around for ages, so of course, fair game.
Indeed.
Steelback and VeXii. But it's weird because I feel like when they came into the LCS, they were kind of forcing this like, they could still play a late game like last split narrative, and it was just really weird.
Oh yeah, yeah, they were. Yeah,
it was so strange. But they started obviously changing up their drafts, and I think that helped them out a little bit. But there was a transition period from that. I think that in keeping not wanting to venture too far out of their comfort zones in terms of like what their players could play, like keeping Steelback on AD carries was also a good call. So that's nice from Giants.
Like, to be fair with this team, like this is one where actually in a sense I don't blame them, because if you look at the Giants org throughout history, they don't seem like an org that has like good financial backing and could necessarily get the free agents they want.
Yeah, I mean it's not. I'm not going to say.
No, it pretty much says it all. It pretty much says it all about your team. If your talent gets poached by Roccat when Rockat's at the fucking bottom, like at that point in time, what tipped the deal there? Extra keyboard? Like fucking hell, Giants, come on. So anyway, fair enough. The best thing Giants do regularly is either not get relegated or get relegated and inexplicably get back in the league when someone else gets it. So they literally are an example of a team where it's like, well, at least you gave it your all. You know,
there was one season where they had Smitty J,
but then Riot said, this will not stand. We will remove the lane swap. There we go. You're out. So yeah, remember that one? They had Knight. Yeah, he was beasting it. And then Riot was like, something is wrong with this. This is unacceptable. Kill the lane swap.
No, this team was, I wouldn't say this was a lane swap issue. It's just that they had like suddenly some major problem.
It was called Sunstar. It was called Sunstar on 80 carry.
Wasn't there ADC garbage?
That was
I would say I wasn't gonna explicitly say it, but they publicly said they weren't scrimming right leading up to playoffs. So that's a bit of a BG. So there you go.
And sadly, just completely ruined the career of that Knight guy.
Major internal issues. I mean, he continued to play after that for another split, and he was still. I think Maxler was a huge star of that team, and like Maxler always makes his mids look better once he finds groove with them. So, and also champion pool was really beneficial tonight at that moment. Like I can't remember explicitly what he was playing, but if you looked at,
it was one of the big ones.
If you looked at the picks, he was consistently playing like these types of high mid priority champions that win most matchups anyway, and then like Maxler would get invade off of that, and then they would both snowball super hard. So that was one of the Giants things from that iteration. But yeah, obviously, like it's weird because Roccat like to say, oh, we're really good at discovering talent, but they never really find like pure rookie. They very rarely find like pure rookies that people weren't already talking about, and then most of the time they're just taking from teams that are also lower tier teams.
What they do, Kelsey, is they basically just know that no one watches Challenger. So what they do is they know that if you're just in Challenger, you don't exist. You are just basically, you know, like as far as we know, you're just like Courtney Cox getting pulled up at that Bruce Springsteen video where she comes out of the crowd, you know. So what basically Roccat does is they just swoop in when you've been like struggling for ages with the jam jar, and then when it's almost off, they're like, hey, I think I can do it. And then they just tap it. Oh, there we go. Oh, there we go. Pickles, anyone with pickles?
Whereas if Giants succeed, it's because they do actually have to discover someone, because if anyone else knows about this guy, it's over. So, yeah.
Right. Here's the thing, Vedius. If you've been following, you might have noticed a pattern so far in how we've gone from team to team to team.
Yes, I have.
We've been working our way down the league standings. You know, there wasn't any sort of clever system in place. So here's the way we're going to handle this last one, okay, Vedius? Okay. Is you're going to give me your analysis on this team.
Okay.
And Kelsey has a couple of options as to what she wants to do. She can either sit in silence and just bitterly, like, say that you're wrong based on things only she can know from internally and we can't ever know, and therefore gain a sort of disingenuous advantage on you,
right,
in order to like offset the losses. Or she can say nothing, and that's fine, and we'll pretend as though there's only 9 teams in the EU LCS. To be fair, a lot of people would say that. So we'll see which one she chooses. We won't reveal yet which she's going to do. So Vedius, what do you think of H2K Gaming? And by the way, for anyone wondering, wait a second, I'll just put a pin in that for 1 second. Okay. Anyone wondering, right, come on, Thorin, you say you're back, you're giving a lot of opinions this episode, you're surely not just going to let that press release fly, are you? No, I'm not. But listen, that needs to be savoured. That is going to be a fine piece of haute couture. So I'm going to save that for a separate video in which, don't worry, it will be a classic. It's going to be up there with the Link one. We're going to break it all down. We're going to have some fun with it, but we're not going to do that in front of Kelsey on the show now. Vedius, what do you think of H2K Gaming summer split team? Because here's the thing, mate. You can't take away from them that amazing. No, I'm teasing the press release there. Come on, what do you think of this team? Obviously, they haven't won any games, so it's not a good sign, is it?
So, H2K, I think, have. I'll start with the positives. I'll start with the hero building. Be quick. Yeah, right. I think they have really good carries in the Sheriff and Selfie. I think they have proven before that these guys can play at a high level. Mechanically, they're very talented. For sure. And I think that they can be very good players. That's the positives over. Now, I think that so far as a team, Schalke has been unbelievably underwhelming. I feel like that his overall early game presence is little to non-existent. And when he has shown it, whenever they've tried to make early game moves, they've either been hard countered, like the enemy team has just reacted and outplayed them, or the enemy team has just gotten something more on the other side of the map. So it feels like that they don't use their resources very efficiently. And even if they do find plays, they end up not getting a huge amount off the back of it. So I don't think that jungler is very impactful. I think Smitty J gets hard left out to dry, and I don't think that he has the skill to be able to handle the amount of pressure that gets thrown his way. I think when you think about players like Soaz, who have kind of historically been known for dealing with a lot of top lane pressure, and even though he still dies, he's still able to be relevant throughout the rest of the game. Smitty J is like the exact opposite of that. He's someone that you can shut down early, and he's someone that very much struggles to get back into the game, and he doesn't really get involved in the rest of the game. You just kind of look at the other two carries to kind of step up. And then the other thing is that I think that they often draft towards more late game, like focus comps, which they just don't work in the current meta, because if you want to go more towards late game, you need to be able to successfully find ways of stalling. And what was it? Their most recent game, because I watched it, Unicorns of Love. So the interesting thing about the Unicorns of Love was that they ended up sacrificing their top side in order to gain advantages bot. So the game was actually relatively even for a decent amount of time, but they ended up getting picked off a couple of times, and then Exile got a couple kills. But even then, like, the game was still actually relatively even. And then every time they tried to force a fight and Promiscu tried to engage, he failed almost every single one of them. Like, his Rakan ulti engages, like, failed multiple times. So they never even got a good team fight when they had decent spikes with their comp. And then even after they lose Baron, and even after they actually start winning fights in their own base, they still aren't able to do anything with it because Sheriff randomly walks out and gets solo killed by Neon. Like, the team just makes so many individual mistakes. They can't seem to function as a team. I don't think they're comfortable in their draft. And I don't think that they know how to play towards really any kind of early game.
One thing I appreciate about their draft, though, is that they are trying to mask it by just playing different champions every single game. So, like, you can't actually identify what they think their good champions are because it's just different ones every game. So,
yeah.
No problem.
And I just think that overall, they haven't really shown me anything to have a lot of confidence in them. And again, maybe there's something in scrims that's good about them. I haven't heard a lot of praise from the teams that I've spoken to. But yeah, I have very little faith in this. And it just surprises me because based on the fact that they went like 7-3 in the second half of last split, largely off the back of late game team fights, I actually kind of looked at this team and thought that they would do better. I thought they'd be like more of a middle of the pack team because I thought that it had talented players on it. But so far, I haven't been able to see any of that talent, and I have not been impressed with what the team has been able to do. So until they show me something different, I'm going to be pretty convinced that this team, well, is pretty bad.
Right, here's the thing, Kelsey. If you don't plan on saying anything, it would be funny to just cut on that because obviously people will be waiting to see what you say. Do you actually have anything you want to respond with, though?
It's kind of hard to really say a whole lot, I guess. But I would say, like, I wouldn't say that we always. I don't agree that we always draft for late game because we usually have like explicitly a lane that we can play around that has like a good matchup at the very least. Sure. Like, I don't think that that's true.
Okay.
But I would disagree with that. I can understand why it looks like we're just playing for late game because we aren't playing correctly to our win conditions, generally speaking.
Mm-hmm. Just not winning the early game. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, we're just not like looking to do it correctly at the right timings and stuff like this. And so there are just like a lot of problems with the team in general. obviously, I'm not saying we have like the best composition setups ever either, but it's like I don't think that that's something that we do, and we do have good matchups. They just, things go wrong very obviously. So like there are a lot of problems, and yeah, that's I'm not gonna give a huge long excuse or say anything weird, because obviously, as Thorin already pointed out, my org has done that. So
I'll take care of that for you.
No.
What about this then? Because here's the thing, I've realised now, Vedius, you're in my head now. I keep thinking about the whole episode. Based on what you said at the beginning of the episode, we've done this show totally wrong. Because I always wondered the same with the EU LCS, you know. Like, if anything, if people have noticed, I actually go harder on the EU LCS pros than I do on the NALCS pros. I'm actually not sure why that is. I think maybe just I know some of them better. I'm not on if I maybe know a bit more of the context around them. Whereas if someone's just awful in EU, we just meme on them. So what I'll say is this. If you look at the timeline of this episode, we've done everything that you said wrong, because we started with all the top teams. By the time we were even 2 teams in, we were breaking down how flawed they are and how like, they're not that good. That was the best teams. Then as we got into the back half, you know, like the sort of meme gumbos become increased a lot more, you know, we're referencing a lot more shit. And we've ended on such a low that now people are just concerned for Kelsey's well-being, like everything, if everything's okay at home and everything. So here's the thing. Let's end on it. Let's reach down deep, grab our inner NA, and just try and end on a high. So what we're going to do is this, okay? This is the way we're going to mind fuck ourselves that things are okay in the EU LCS. Vedius, who in this split has been the revelation of the split? Like, which player has like performed better than you'd expect, or that someone maybe who hasn't even done much before and suddenly they're playing like a good player, or just someone where it's the feel-good story? Who should it be for this split?
I mean, the easy one is Sencux. I mean, we already talked about him earlier. The fact that he's gone from pretty much a very average to below average mid laner to now competing with the top mid laners that we have in Europe is definitely a big positive story. Baxter is also someone that I think is being regarded as one of the best junglers in Europe. And you think back to where he started 2 years ago, where he joined Giants, the fact that he had a pretty good inaugural split, and ever since then he's just kind of been on the up and up and kind of been building his credibility over the last couple of years, is another player that's definitely worth mentioning. In terms of like middle of the pack teams, I always think it's worth mentioning players like Attila. I think that he is really talented, and I actually think that he is someone that is worth keeping your eye on because of the not only the depth of his champion pool, but his pretty good understanding of the game, and his mechanical skill is very impressive. So I definitely think that there are a couple of highlights. The problem is it just feels right now that we are a top-heavy region where our top 3/4 teams are just that much better than the teams below them, that the bottom team's flaws are just that much more obvious, and they still have compelling stories, and I still think that they are fun games of League of Legends to watch, but the top teams just kind of expose them a little bit more, which naturally means that the analysis is a little bit more critical.
Do you have a name you want to throw in, Kelsey?
Yeah, like I said, I think that I've tried to pick out players, good things about the lower tier teams, because people don't say them as much, and I try to like be more critical of the top tier teams, because I'm not just, I don't know, I try to say things that maybe aren't super obvious every time, but so it probably comes out like, we're trashing the top tier teams, etc., etc. But in terms of players that I would want to highlight as being like really unexpectedly good this split, gosh, like I actually just want to talk about Neon more. He hasn't played that much, but I do think that he's a player that will be really interesting to watch. And I'm glad to, like, he had a really good EU Masters, even if Millennium were a mess. So if you haven't seen him play, like, I think he had probably the best Kai'Sa in the tournament at a time when people weren't really playing, we're still figuring out the champion a bit. So he's definitely someone to watch that I would like to point out. I think, yeah, that's that would be my person to bring up other than Sencux, who's obviously, we already talked about how good Sencux's split has been. Fnatic's entire team, we said that they basically are brute forcing their wins, mechanical stars, if you will. Obviously, Wonder is someone, apparently Denmark doesn't have a good top laner if you read ESPN. But Wonder is probably the best Western top laner right now. So there you go.
Yeah, actually, what do you think of that, Vedius? Because even though that might sound ridiculous to some people, because obviously, as we said, like a lot of NA people don't watch EU, I think that's a pretty reasonable shout. Like, one of the things I found underwhelming about this meta, in the West at least, is that you don't really see the top laners doing much. Like, despite all this diversity and all these other roles that can it actually feels like, I mean, they play similar champions and they don't really get to carry anyway. So he has been pretty spectacular, right?
Yeah, I think Wonder's been pretty exceptional. I would say that Wonder is a high impact player relative to the rest of his team. Relative to other top laners, in that often you look at him and he is one of the big playmakers or someone that is actually having an impact that can swing the game in a certain direction. But in terms of like just as a top laner, Alfari is very comparable in terms of like the fact that he gets low resources, the fact that he's not a big playmaker and he's not someone that necessarily stands out, but he solo killed Wonder just last week in their matchup. So it is Mundo versus Gangplank, and you can credit or discredit whoever you want, but the fact that he got the solo kill is still admirable, and I feel like he is someone that he's just harder to talk about because the other members on his team shine and they make more plays, so they're easier to notice. Sure. And then the other one is Soaz. He's been super stable this split, something you cannot commonly say about Soaz. He was known for just randomly dying for the most random reasons for so long, whereas this split, he's been very consistent. He's shown a very wide depth of champions, both tanks and Heimerdinger, and I think that he's also had a pretty good split. So I think top lane talent in Europe is pretty good this split.
I mean, Soaz is someone where I would say something that people don't talk a lot about him is just he's one of the best fill players, He just goes solo queue. I've to random my champion this game. What role am I going to play? I'm going to queue Phil. Let's go. So this should be a meta where, I'm first timing my champion on stage. Cool stuff. And where everyone else is basically playing in bot lane like they're first timing their champion on stage, regardless of whether they are or not. He's going to really stand out. Also,
I'll actually tell you a little story along those lines, an anecdote, from behind the scenes. And this is one where I'm not going to say who it was, and it's from so many years ago that no one's going to get mad about, But in a scenario where I was talking to someone from Fnatic, again, many years ago, this is when Soaz was in Fnatic the first time, there was someone, people know, probably they can guess the timing of this was when they were asking me to be their coach, etc. So I was doing all the diligence, the background research, if we keep this player, what's he like, etc. And one of the things they did tell me about Soaz was that at one point in time in like season 4, first of all, there were like a few champions that if he played, he was like fucking killing it, but then he was just refusing to play them because he was like, nah, he's a bad champ. He's a bad champ. And then they were going, what the fuck? You're the best on it though. And he was going, yeah, but it's bad. And he was using that like forgiven logic of like, if you win on like a champion that's bad, then like, how can they know that it's because you were incredibly superior in every way? Which I've never understood because as I always tell them, like, the first place check cash is the same way, guys. Like, the bank teller doesn't go, but wait a minute, you played Shen? Sorry, this is only worth half as much now. So the anecdote is this, right? It also worked the other way around, where what would happen was they were telling Soaz, like, dude, this is like going to come right in the meta now. It's really strong. And he would be like, nah. And he just wouldn't ever scrim it. But then he was literally just pulling shit out in like playoff games and stuff that he'd like never played. And he was just pulling it out. And then the other team was just thinking like, fuck, why didn't we know he plays that? It's like he doesn't. Even his own team's like, fuck. And he was just winning on it. So like the guy is just a certified G. Like he clearly just doesn't give a fuck. Like, I love that though. I think that's legit. That's sick.
So as the legend forever and always.
Pretty good, right? Yeah, not bad.
He just has to play Blitzcrank.
Could probably do it in this matter, right? if any. Well, that's the funny thing, actually. That's the one question I have, is this, Kelsey, is why has Fnatic not done that more? Like, if you're going to run the two top laners and run them both on bruises in so many games, why not have, like, mad swaps where no one can guess that that's going to happen? They haven't really exploited that very much, though. I would have thought that would be an obvious, like, move to throw in there to throw someone off. I
mean, they've done it a little bit with Heimer. Sure. But outside of that, you're right. Yeah. They've only really done it with Heimer, I think.
Because they would have like that. They would have the mad ability to sort of flex just in the moment. They wouldn't even have to have necessarily done it in the draft phase. You know.
It's weird because I would say teams globally in general haven't really done that much. Like
no one really has, as far as I can think of.
The most common stuff you'll see is the AD carries going mid to play funnel, right?
Sure, yeah.
But like RNG, for example, is a team that is the one that has done it the most, where, okay, we have Zatai playing now. Zatai is actually playing mid, and Xiaohu's playing AD bot, or not AD, but bot, like while UCI is recovering. When UCI was playing, he would play an AD carry every game, but sometimes he would play a top lane against Mundo, and then you'd have Xiaohu bot and Let Me in mid, right? It was just all, like, depending on, okay, I'll play the champion into whatever matchup in whatever lane. No other team has done it nearly as much as RNG has, and I think that helped them a lot, give them flexibility, even though they were playing, if you look at their drafts without seeing who was playing what, they look like they're playing, or where they were playing it, they look like they're playing a very standard style of game, and I think that drafting flexibility helped them sort of get away with it in a lot of situations. But I haven't seen a lot of teams just in general do that kind of thing, which is interesting. So.
Yeah, because that's something, as soon as I saw the meta, I actually assumed some of the really flexible teams would do. Or, for example, you'd do that if you did have a traditional AD carry and you wanted to funnel on him. But actually, it's amazing how rarely it's been done in all the regions I've watched. Yeah. It's one of those mysteries. Just end on a mystery. This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Alex Adams, Daniel Yordanov, TTMXMP, VeXii, HawpT, Robert Baxter, and Travis Greb, with a special thanks going out to Jerky's Minion. Want teasers for my upcoming content? To ask a question for my monthly AMA? How about taking part in a discussion with me about esports? Or perhaps you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Become a part of the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.